brewery whistle in St Austell has just gone off, so it must be around 10 o'clock, but we're waiting for the live stream to go. Chairman, okay, it's started now.
Okay, am I good to go?
You are, Chairman.
Thank you. Okay, good morning everybody. Welcome to this virtual meeting of the Economic Growth and Development Overview and Scrutiny Committee. My name is Councillor Jim McKenna. I represent Penzance Promenade and I chair this meeting. So before consideration of today's business, I will outline the protocols for the meeting. Today's meeting is being live streamed to the public via Microsoft Teams and it is also being recorded. Can I remind members and officers to introduce yourselves each time you speak if you haven't been introduced in speaking, and turn your video and microphone off when you have finished speaking. I will be limiting, bar exceptional circumstances, each member to 2 minutes, and Debbie Bolton will be keeping time during the meeting. If the Council's live stream fails today and we cannot share proceedings, I will adjourn the meeting so that access can be restored. If the issue cannot be resolved, I will halt the meeting and thus remaining business will be concluded at a future date. If a member experiences a technical issue, I will adjourn for a short period to try to re-establish their connection, or indeed to try and help them re-establish their connection. Any members wishing to speak or ask a question should indicate by typing X in the chat box. Where we have a presentation, it's my intention to allow officers to finish that presentation before inviting questions. And Councillor Duffin, the Vice Chair, will monitor those members wishing to speak, and we'll try our best to call them in order. As I call members to speak, I'll remind you to switch on your microphone. If for some reason you can't be heard, the Democratic and Governance Officer will advise you. Votes, having learned from previous experience, will be taken using a roll call procedure. The Democratic and Governance Officer will read out the recommendation and the name of the proposer and seconder, and will then call each committee member's name in turn. You should confirm your name and advise whether you vote in favour or against the recommendation, or whether you wish to abstain from the vote. The Democratic and Governance Officer will then count the votes and advise the result accordingly. Where a member has declared a non-registrable interest, a disclosable pecuniary interest, or an interest by virtue of any trade union membership in a matter, they should leave the virtual meeting. Their departure will be confirmed and they will be invited to rejoin the meeting at the appropriate time. As things stand, I plan to have a short, probably 5-minute break at around about 11:45 after the home choice item has been considered, but I will try and avoid breaking mid-agenda item. This formal meeting today will be followed by an informal session, about 45 minutes, regarding fish quota investment opportunities. So can I ask members at the end of the formal meeting to stay on the meeting to participate in this discussion? The live stream will end at the formal part of the meeting. Before we start today's business, I will ask Lynn Davey, the Democratic and Governance Officer, to confirm each member's attendance. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I will now call each member by name and I would ask that they confirm their name and their electoral division. So I'll start with Councillor Biscoe.
Bert Biscoe, Boscawen, Truro.
Thank you, Councillor Biscoe. Councillor Brown.
Good morning, Malcolm Brown, St Austell, Bethel.
Thank you. Councillor Cole.
Good morning, Dick Cole, St Eneder Division.
Thank you. Councillor Duffin.
Good morning, Joyce Duffin, Cornwall Councillor for Mount Hawke and Portreath.
Thank you. Councillor Ellenbrook.
Good morning, Barbara Ellenbrook, Councillor for Redruth Central.
Thank you. Councillor Eccles-Smythe.
Good morning, David Eakins-Smith, Councillor for 11 and substituting for Councillor Lee Frost.
Thank you. Councillor Harris. Oh, sorry, I've got that wrong, haven't I? Councillor LeBroy.
Good morning, Peter LeBroy, Bude Division.
Councillor McKenna.
Hi, Lynn, Jim McKenna, Cornwall Councillor, Penzance Promenade Division.
Thank you. Councillor McLennan.
Good morning, everybody. Mike McLennan, Councillor for St Stephen in Brennell Division.
Councillor Olivier.
Good morning, Lynn. Cornelius Olivier, Councillor for Penzance Central.
Thank you. Councillor Pascoe.
Good morning, Councillor Pascoe, Liskeard West and Ogwalls.
Thank you. Councillor Pollard.
Mittendar, John Pollard, Hale North.
Councillor Rossworth.
Stephen Rushworth, councillor for St Izzy and St Judy division.
Thank you. And Councillor Thomas.
Borodar, Mike Thomas, councillor for Helston North.
And have I left somebody out there?
Yes, Councillor Robinson, St Ives East.
Thank you, Councillor Robinson.
Lynn, thank you. Members, welcome once again. If we could start the meeting proper. So apologies for absence. I have Councillor Frost, who has been more than ably represented by Councillor Ekinsmythe. And I have a note that Councillor Brown may be late. He has an appointment, but he hopes to join us later. Any more from anybody? In which case, thank you.
Sorry, Chairman. I just want to introduce the portfolio holders who are in attendance today. Okay. Councillor Jeff Brown, who I think you just said will be just a little bit late. Councillor Tim Dwelly and Councillor Andrew Mitchell. And then officers in attendance is Phil Mason, Director for Economic Growth and Development. Glenn Kaplan, Service Director for Economic Growth. Emily Kent, Head of Economy, Skills and Culture. John Lloyd Owen, Service Director for Housing, Mel Brain, Head of Housing Strategy and Partnership, Louise Wood, Service Director for Planning and Sustainable Development, Vicky Fraser, Interim Service Director for Transport, Tracy Stephanie, Strategic Financial Manager, Mel Dyer, Business Reporting Manager, there's myself from Democratic and Governance Officer, Debbie Bolton, Democratic and Governance Officer, who will be producing the meeting, and Richard Orkwood, who is doing the live stream today. Thank you.
Lynn, thank you, and a particular welcome to Richard Orkwood, because I believe that's his first meeting supporting us, so you're very welcome and thank you. Item 2 then on the agenda, declarations of interest. Does any member have anything they want to declare in relation to an item on today's agenda? That would appear to be not. Thank you. So I've just seen the next in the box. I think is that Councillor McLennan?
Yes, Chair. I'm on Cornwall Housing and non-exec.
Okay, thank you. That is duly noted. Thank you, Councillor McLennan. Any more for any more? In which case, thank you. Item 3 then is the minutes of the last meeting. If we could go through them page by page for accuracy, first of all, and then matters arising not on the agenda. And this was the meeting held on Tuesday, 13th of October at 10 AM. So page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4, page 5, page 6, page 7, page 8, page 9, page 10, and page 11. Could I possibly have a proposer and seconder then that the minutes represent a true and accurate record of the last meeting?
Propose.
Seconded, Chair.
Councillor Thomas and Councillor Olivier, thank you. Lynn, do we need to do this by roll call or can we do it by exception if anybody has any objection?
No, we need to do it by roll call if you don't mind.
Yes,
so the recommendation is that the minutes of the meeting of the Economic Growth and Development Overview and Scrutiny Committee held on the 30th of October 2020 were correctly recorded and that it be signed by the chairman. And this was proposed by Councillor Thomas and seconded by Councillor Olivier. And I'll go by roll call, please. So Councillor Biscoe.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Brown.
4.
Councillor Cole.
4.
Councillor Duffin. 4. Councillor Ellenbrook.
4.
Councillor Ekinsmythe.
Abstain, I wasn't at the meeting.
Thank you. Councillor Robinson.
Abstain, I wasn't at the meeting.
Thank you. Councillor Broy.
4.
Thank you. Councillor McKenna.
4.
Councillor Brennan.
4.
McLaren. Thank you. Councillor Olivier.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Pascoe.
4.
Councillor Pollard.
4.
Councillor Rushworth.
4.
Councillor Thomas.
4.
And that's been carried. 13 votes, none against and 2 abstentions.
Lynn, thank you. If we could just go through the minutes again very briefly then for matters arising not on the agenda. Page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4, page 5, page 6, page 7, page 8, page 9.
Chair, just a very brief point on
Is
the
this
bottom.
Councillor Olivier?
Yeah, sorry, I'll put my camera on as well. I do apologise. Yeah, at the bottom of page 9, there is a part 4 within the resolved. The private rented sector housing panel be reconvened to consider standards within the social housing sector at the earliest possible opportunity.
Yeah.
I just thought it would be a good idea to draw attention to the fact that is a commitment that was made at the time, which we need to follow up as soon as we can.
It might be worth asking that question if Councillor Mitchell is the Cabinet Member when we have Cabinet Members' questions, Councillor Levy.
Okay, thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. Page 10. And page 11. Members, thank you. Officers, thank you. All good. So that takes us on to item 4, which is public questions. I haven't been notified of any. Lynn, can you confirm we haven't received any on this occasion?
There are no public questions.
Okay, thank you. That takes us then on to the first substantive item, which is an update on the budget setting in relation to the current month. I understand that Phil Mason will cover the presentation that was sent out to members and then invite each of the heads of service to speak briefly for a minute or two, just to highlight by exception any matters of interest in relation to their service responsibilities. So, Phil, are we good to go? Can we get the presentation uploaded?
Yeah, I'm good to go. We'll just wait for the...
Brilliant.
Okay, could we put that on slideshow? That's brilliant. Okay. So, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, yes, we were asked to bring you this update, and what we wanted to do was give you as much time as possible for questions and answers. So we're going to be relatively quick in going through this, having sent it out in advance. Now, what we wanted to do was for me to take you through the main presentation in terms of our approach to the budget setting, and then, as the chair has said, to ask the service directors to give you a view as far as they can at the moment in respect of the potential impacts on each of those service areas that they represent. So if we could move on to slide 3, which is really the starting point, and I'm not going to read this as you'd appreciate line by line. To recap, the budget process is in the context of a period of unprecedented financial challenge, and we had already got £30 million of savings in the medium-term financial plan, which had been approved for this year, which we have largely not been able to deliver because of the impact of COVID, as well as the further impacts of the costs that we've had to meet, despite the fact that we have also received grants and income from government in respect of some of those matters. But the revised budget gap is significant, and you can see that from the slides, and therefore increased savings are required for next year, right the way through then for the following 4 years. So the new medium-term financial plan has got larger savings to be made than we had thought that we would have to make before COVID. And we are asking the committees to take a strategic view to budget setting, and essentially if we want to identify areas where you believe that more money needs to be spent, we are under an obligation to find areas where we will spend less, because we can't call on new money to be able to fill that gap. So essentially we're looking at a 4-year transformational programme. We're starting to talk about a smaller organisation based around a new target operating model, which essentially are the guiding principles which articulate how you get from the agreed principles for the organisation to the operational changes that we need to put in place to meet those principles and priorities that you want for this organisation. But that's going to take some time, and essentially for next year we're going to be focused on the foundations to put that in place. So if we could just move on, please. So what are the expenditure reduction mechanisms, or what are we going to do to spend less money? We're going to be looking at, as I say, the savings which we'd already put in the budget for this year and for next year to make sure that we can still deliver on those, and we've set those out in this presentation. We're looking at reducing the vacancy budget to 3% across the organisation, reducing budgeted posts through a current scheme that's in place and currently taking place, which is seeking voluntary redundancy or voluntary severance. Looking at the work design, so where do we do things in many places, maybe the similar things, can we bring those activities together? We have to focus on contract management and procurement because of our very large spend on contracts, 753 million a year, and also some technical accounting, and I'll bring accountant Tracy in to help me answer any questions on this, but some technical issues which will ensure we can right size our budgets to make them appropriate for the activities that we need to undertake. And detailed work is going to carry on throughout the autumn, bringing this back to members in January. So if we can move on, please. So I'm not going to go through these, but there's 2 charts here, 2 slides, which set out those targets which we'd already agreed to in the current MTFP. So we'd be happy to answer any questions on those, but we are still obliged to make those savings in addition to the areas which we're now concentrating on. So the first one of those being vacancy budget reductions to 3%. This directorate only currently operates with a vacancy management margin of about 2%. So that's for turnover. So when people leave the organisation to when we fill those posts, we find that we have about 2%. So this isn't going to impact on us other than how it normally impacts in respect of we rely on that 2% to make sure that we don't overspend our budgets, but that is a natural turnover for this organisation, for the EG, Economic Growth and Development Directorate. So if we can move on. So we are currently going through an exercise, I said, about targeted voluntary severance, and we are part way through that. We know that we have a number of requests within our department, but as yet they haven't been confirmed. I am co-chairing a panel which is cross-directorate looking at those requests for voluntary redundancies. We're also looking and starting to look at areas of duplication, and we've started to do that in respect of some of our regulatory service areas. So if we could move on, please. So this slide sets out the need for the focus on contract management because, as I say, a large area. The directorate has a significant spend across to our contractors, and therefore we'll need to take proportionate amounts of money out of that to ensure that we are reducing not just our staffing base but the contracts which are often delivering services directly to our residents as well. So if we can move on, please. In terms of technical accounting, some examples of the things that we will need to do. Right sizing means that we might have underspent in one area but overspent in another, and we've just used that slippage in one place to help fund a budget that hasn't been big enough in another. So we're trying to put the money in the right place. Reviewing our reserves, we often have some very specific and targeted reserves, so we need to review those. And we do rely on capital revenue funding switches to ensure that we have sufficient money, revenue money, for things like highway maintenance. We're also doing, of course, detailed budget reviews of the detailed elements of mileage, expenses, subscriptions, and thinking about how we're going to be working in the future. As well as that, of course, we are income generating, and we need to ensure that wherever we can, income fees and charges rise in line at least with inflation measures, so that we don't reduce our income take as a proportion of our budgets. So if we can move forward, we're going to shortly be talking to Cabinet colleagues in respect of potential capital asks. This directorate has been a significant place in terms of requesting capital to help fund the type of activity and growth and projects that we need, because we need to ensure we invest in infrastructure, things like housing, things like commercial workspace as we go forward, because growth is going to be part of the way in which we ensure the council's got sufficient money as we go forward. So next slide, please. So I'm going to at this point hand over to each of the service directors to just have a short discussion about the way in which they think that the budget process and the budget reductions will impact on their area. So if I can hand over to Glenn Kaplan first, please.
Phil, thank you. Service directors, if you could keep it reasonably succinct to give members the opportunity to ask questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I think just picking up some of the detail on the slides that Phil's just talked to, I think the key thing for us over the next couple of years, certainly the period of the medium-term financial plan, is going to be not only adjusting to the recent COVID crisis and the economic impact of that and responding to that, which will be a budget pressure, but also adjusting what from an economic development sense will be probably the biggest change in the policy framework and the funding mechanisms we've had in 20 years, which will be the end of the EU programmes and withdrawal from the European Union. And so what you saw on the slides there, the biggest reduction in the medium-term financial plan is under the coding of EDC 11, which is essentially decreasing our match funding and commissioning of Cornwall Development Company in line with the end of the EU programme. So as the EU programme comes to its scheduled close, the projects and programmes that we're delivering through CDC will come to a close as well. So we will need to think about new service design, new structures of economic development moving forward, particularly hopefully integrating the Shared Prosperity Fund when that is announced and delivered, hopefully over the next few years. We're hopeful that there might be some mention of how that might work, perhaps a pilot in the comprehensive spending review over the next couple of weeks, but of course we don't know the detail of that until we see it. So I think the major challenge which we can manage in a financial sense, and we've set that out in the next 3 years to Cornwall Development Company, and it tracks the end of the EU programme, is a reasonably risk-free strategy in terms of the medium-term financial plan, but it does present challenges in terms of making sure that we have the resources necessary to respond to the impact of COVID, but also the longer term strategy of increasing productivity, wages, skills as part of our long-term local industrial strategy. So I think that change in funding mechanism, the change in how we deliver economic development is a key element of our financial plan. The other thing I would mention just in terms of the MTFP is clearly we have a strategy in place to try and charge our projects, charge our staff time, our core costs to projects. During COVID, where we've been redeploying staff and projects have been delayed, that is a challenge, still very much within the tolerances of delivering the medium-term financial plan, but that's also something to watch as we perhaps move through future lockdowns and project challenges.
Glenn, thank you. Who do we have next?
Could we have Louise, please, for planning?
Yeah, next on the list.
Louise, welcome.
Well, thank you, Councillor McKenna. Okay, so I think probably the challenge for us is the same as some of the challenges that perhaps it always is in terms of that demand versus income position that we find us in. So as we've discussed before, planning service is really reliant on planning application, building control, land charges, searches, income to fund our services. And it's important to remember in that space that the level of many of those fees, and crucially those planning fees, are statutorily set, so outside of our control in terms of when they increase, and the government doesn't do annual increases, so some of that is outside of our control. Alongside that, we use grant and capitalisation as projects to help fund our delivery and policy functions. And that project work that we do really is important in terms of helping us to deliver the local plan, ensuring those site allocations get delivered. And the regeneration work is part of us having a rounded planning proposition. So, you know, that summary position of us receiving about £750,000 worth of revenue funding to fund a £12 million service. So the bulk of what we do is funded by income. So offset against that income, then obviously is demand. And so that kind of comes to that challenge then for the next couple of years for us, is that and we know there's usually a correlation between economic cycles and demand and planning income. And early indications in the pandemic showed a decline in that income. And, you know, it's really hard, isn't it, to predict with any future confidence where we're going. What I do know is at the moment we've had a reasonable bounce back in terms of income in services, particularly seen in land charges, for example. And I know in that space, members will be aware that actually that kind of stop and stand still of the market has led us to a kind of increased glut and backlog of work in land charges. And we've been working really hard to offset that. So we've got a challenge of not being able to host personal search agents in our offices. So we're having to do free work, and we've got that kind of build up of work. But we have already got the days down from a peak of around 27 days down to 20. We hope to be down to 15 days for a turnaround period in the next couple of weeks and back down to 10 by Christmas. So I think that little microcosm just shows that continual challenge that we do in terms of balancing demand and capacity within the service and monitoring income, which is a kind of monthly and regular task that we do all through the year and every year. So in terms of getting to a position with dealing with our MTFP savings for the next couple of years going forward, it's really about us working in ways to be more efficient. We're looking at our back office, we're expediting the scanning of our files and use of technology to help us be more agile. And we're looking at synergies between services and how we align that so that we do things once and not multiple times. So there's that kind of efficiency piece that we'll be working on over the next few years. And I suppose the concern or the uncertainty is, where will income go? And, you know, we could see a very gradual decline. We might not. It's very hard to predict. And I think just thrown into the mix of that piece of what we need to focus on a little bit is around what the government does with planning reform. So the scale of the reforms that's been discussed, we would expect to see new burdens grants to come with that. But whatever happens really in the next administration, so in the next couple of years, we need to review our local plan, which is obviously a significant revenue burden to the organisation. So really, it's that kind of regular piece around income and demand, and then also those wider demands of the service, like refreshing the local plan, which come round, and we need to find ways of funding. So that's our challenges and our issues, really. Thank you.
Louise, thank you. That was ideally pitched. Thank you. Who's next?
Vicky, please.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair.
Vicky, welcome.
Thank you. So in terms of the pressures in the transport service, I think as we've raised before to this committee, there is a pressure around the income anticipated from parking, and that income goes towards essential maintenance of our highways and other council services. It's an impossible one to predict at this stage. September figures showed there was we were back to 100%, but clearly with the recent lockdown, other restrictions, that's going to be a difficult one to track. There is also a link to that, and how we ensure we provide accesses around the bus contract. This council has let an 8-year bus contract that was very much focused on a full network and a high quality network. The Department for Transport is continuing to support bus operators at the moment through a bus services support grant recovery, which does provide top-up funding. Public transport as a sector has taken a significant hit as a result of COVID, and we really are focused as a service to stabilise that network and recover to where we were in Cornwall prior to COVID, and then grow onto that. So at this stage, again, it's difficult to understand what future mitigations may be required in terms of the budget there, but it is a risk to the service. Something that we will be looking at in terms of that we always do, and we need to look to do as an opportunity in terms of saving, is making sure we're capitalising our costs where appropriate. There doesn't seem, in terms of demand, there doesn't seem to be any indication that the delivery of new infrastructure will decrease. And while some of the grant funding opportunities in government have been delayed, certainly the messages are that there will be a push on build, and we are anticipating that the government will put more opportunities for investing in transport infrastructure as a priority as part of the economic recovery. So we need to make sure where we can that our costs as a service in delivering capital infrastructure are properly capitalised, and that also where we can, we put a sum of maintenance, we capitalise a sum of maintenance for the future maintenance of that infrastructure as part of the capital bid. So that's just an area that we will continue to look at. Thank you, Chairman.
Vicky, thank you.
And John, finally.
Okay, thank you.
So John Lloyd Owen, for those watching.
Sorry, John Lloyd Owen, Service Director for Housing. So the most significant budgetary issue for the housing service is in relation to the costs of temporary accommodation, and the committee will recall that at the last meeting in October, we presented a paper on homelessness and the increased homelessness pressures that we're currently facing, but also the prospective pressures in regard to homelessness and temporary accommodation provision. The majority of the cost of temporary accommodation, in particular emergency accommodation, is expressed through what's called housing benefit subsidy loss. So this is the difference between the housing benefit subsidy the government makes available to provide emergency accommodation and the cost of that accommodation to the council. From next year, that housing benefit subsidy loss amount will be included within the housing service budget. It's currently sits within corporate items. So, and in terms of the current year position, as set out in the report to the last committee meeting, there's a significant budgetary pressure because we've got twice as many households in temporary accommodation as we would normally have. So that is by far the biggest issue that we face as a service. There's a significant piece of work underway to look at projections of future demand and how that demand might be managed and mitigated. Critical to that will be the prevention of homelessness, and we're looking with Cornwall Housing and partners across the sector how we might prevent homelessness, in particular as the private rented sector begins to unlock over coming months. Also, how we can rebalance our provision of temporary accommodation. So we have an over-reliance currently on emergency accommodation, which, as I mentioned, brings a very significant net cost to the council. So through the PRA acquisitions programme, but also through other initiatives, we're looking to reduce our reliance on emergency accommodation and provide more longer-term temporary accommodation. And also critical is enabling people who are in temporary accommodation to move on to more settled accommodation through our social housing vacancies, but also to assist people to move into the private rented sector. So mitigating and managing those demand and associated cost issues is the critical challenge we're going to face over the coming years. Thank you.
John, thank you too. Phil, are we now, does that conclude the sort of the interventions from officers?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, we're complete, so handing over to you. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you. We have about 25 minutes, members, for questions, so we could keep them succinct. Councillor Olivia, you were first on the list, followed by Councillor Lebroy and Councillor Ellenbrook.
Right, thank you, Chair. The reading the report, one thing that concerns me, and I will promise I'll keep this to 2 minutes, is that the more we talk about doing things smarter or doing things differently and we'll manage it, it will be all right, the less we're actually saying we haven't got enough money. And I think we need to get it out there that the government isn't giving us a display of tough love to make us do things better. They're actually making it much harder for us to do what we need to do. So that I wish there was we could get rid of the emphasis that somehow it's going to be all right, when I just don't think it is, and I don't think that you believe it is going to be all right either if things carry on in the present style. Now, if we go to page 14 of my paper agenda, right, for instance, we've got this the test. Is it needed at all, or does it cost less than it before? Can we do it a different way? Spending more locally will be a key driver. This is at the bottom of page 1. What you don't see there is any mention of quality or inclusiveness of service, right? Just will be delivering a service. And also the question about deliver locally, if delivering locally is going to be a bit more expensive than not delivering locally, you know, that surely puts us in a bit of a dilemma. Right, the final point I wanted to make was about capital expenditure. I mean, I'm going to phrase this question very simply because this is phrased to me in a simple way. How much are we actually spending? How much are we committed to spending annually on a programme of council housing, whether through development or acquisition? I mean, I'm putting that in simple terms, and I know it's not simple, so I can give people who ask me that question a simple answer.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Olivier, thank you. Can I take questions from Councillor LeBroy and Ellenbrook, and then the relevant officer can come back as appropriate. So, Councillor LeBroy, please.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to speak purely to the capital programme, and I didn't really feel that sort of Phil gave us enough information on what I'd really like to have seen there, if I'm honest. So perhaps, I don't know, at some point we're going to go back to that or have another look at it. But when Glenn Caplan-Gray talks about chipping off quite a significant amount of match funding that was previously allocated for European supported projects, I understand that obviously we're out of Europe and those opportunities are going, but there will be other opportunities, and to lose those funds that would otherwise support small businesses and enterprises and activities in Cornwall, I think is a mistake, if I'm honest, at this point. I think now more than ever is a time that we should be bullish and confident about investment into Cornwall. And I think coupling this with the local contract management and the circular economy issues that we're talking about also at the minute is just so incredibly important. We cannot afford to lose that sentiment. Let me be the first on this group to talk about the BBC programme with Simon Reeve and Tim Smith that was on last Sunday. They seem to make it all so simple, but I think there are some simple positions that the council can take. And I think maybe grasping some simple issues and making some pretty big commitments to solving problems that we do have might be something that we have to do. I get the feeling that we're clipping the edges of our coins here, where actually we need to be taking much more of a leadership role. And I sense an opportunity in our economy right now that even though we are short on money, and I totally understand that, we mustn't let these opportunities to get things right for Cornwall slip us by. So I'd encourage this group to be very confident about pushing the envelope of our capital programme as far as we can. Thank you.
Councillor LeBroy, thank you. Excellent numismatic knowledge there in terms of clipping coins. Can I just make one point though? I did ask for this briefing early. Most scrutiny committees are getting it, I think, in December, and I think we'll have a refresh in December as well. So this is the information that's available at the moment. There will be further detail as we get closer to January, but we are the exception, I think, in having this this month. But I'm sure John or someone will come back to you, or Glenn will come back to you on that. So, Councillor Ellenbrook, and then I'll invite officers to answer the questions posed so far. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for the presentation. Couple of questions. First of all, on CDC, could you be explicit on what the end date actually is of CDC? And more particularly, could the work that CDC do be done by another department within Cornwall Council? And secondly, on page 15, I have to say I struggled with this. New organisational design sounded a bit like gobbledygook to me, but are we going to see what this new structure is actually going to look like and be allowed to comment on it, because I think that is quite a crucial piece of the jigsaw. Thank you.
Councillor Allenbrook, thank you. I'm assuming we're not talking about a Cornish Assembly, but we'll see. So, Phil and colleagues, can I invite you to come in with regard to the questions posed so far?
Yeah, thank you. So if I can start, and then I'll ask others if I can't cover any of the questions. So, Councillor Olivier, it isn't going to be all right, I think, with some of the statements, and I think we have to be concerned about whether we do have enough money. But my only point on that is sometimes necessity is, as people say, the mother of invention, and it is our job to ensure that wherever possible we can use our pressures and our problems to change our services, not for the worse, but find opportunities actually to make them, yes, less costly, but more effective. And that is always our challenge. And I think we've done that pretty well so far, but we do need to keep doing that. But can we say there will never be a reduction in service? No, we can't until we do that work. I agree that in our tests we need to include quality of services and inclusivity, so I agree with that. I'll ask John to comment on the cost of the programme for council investment in council housing, so I'll just give him a little bit of notice on that. In terms of Councillor LeBroy's comments, we are currently putting together what we think we would need to invest in capital over the MTFP as a directorate. So we're a bit early for that conversation because we haven't had that conversation with our cabinet colleagues yet, but we are working on that. And rest assured, from our point of view, we want to invest as much money in the infrastructure and growth that we need as much as possible. We have sort of come to the end of the match funding that we had in place for the EU programmes, as you would expect, but we will need to look at our co-funding, our investment opportunities, and our need for some grant to match things like the Towns Fund, shared prosperity when it comes. So we're alive to that and alive to the needs to invest in delivering our local plan and the next local plan. So we are currently compiling what we think as a directorate we'd need over the next 4 years to invest in that, and that discussion will be had. But we have to accept that the more money we borrow to invest in capital or draw down from from other places, there will be some borrowing to do that, and therefore there is an increased revenue burden, a mortgage in effect, as we go forwards. So we always have to be able to make the revenue savings to be able to fund that investment. But I agree we should do it because actually our investment in growth will bring more benefit and income to the council later. In terms of Councillor Ellenbrook's comments about CDC, I can't confirm the end date. I can confirm that the plan is to take that money out of commissioning to CDC as the EU programme diminishes, but the company will have to decide, and the core serve group of companies and the council will have to decide when that company actually isn't viable anymore. And yes, if we bring that to an end earlier or later, then we have to be conscious of where will we have the capacity and expertise to do that work. But we do have other companies in the organisation, and we also have the Economic Growth Service, which could take up some of that work. So I think the only question I haven't answered is the size of the housing capital programme. John?
Thank you, Phil. So I'm sure members are aware, but the funding for new council housing development sits outside the budget that's under discussion today. So it sits within the housing revenue account, which is as I say, a separate budget, and the proposals for the housing revenue account budget and business plan are currently being developed and will come to cabinet and full council in February next year. But in terms of the existing HRA business plan that was agreed February last, there's provision of around £150 million over a period of 4 years, this year and the next 3 years, to bring forward around 900 affordable homes to meet housing need, which also will provide a significant stimulus to the economy over the next few years.
John, thank you, and Phil, thank you. I've got Councillors Biscoe, Rushworth and Harris in the next batch, please. So Councillor Biscoe.
Chairman, I wonder if I could just take us to page 18 of the report. I have a very short and simple question to ask, but before that I'd like to make a couple of comments, if I may. The first one is that I note the comments about CDC, and one of the key elements and everything that Glenn said, and it seems to me that one of the outcomes of the lockdown and all the rest of it is the impact that it has had on the relationship between young people and the availability of skills and the communication of skills, and our future economy, as we have demonstrated over the last quarter of a century as we've developed the European programs. Our economy relies on skills, and it seems, and young people rely on skills in order to make incomes. And at the moment we are in a hiccup as far as that's concerned because of the COVID stuff, and it seems to me there is a real need to focus on skills as the skills development and the work that we've done, and to continue that through to the future. And to be honest with you, I don't really mind where the money comes from as long as the work is done. And then the second thing is about fees and charges and the relationship between that and the need to revive and regenerate town centres, and to address the shortfall which has now occurred and reoccurring as the result of successive lockdowns. There's no guarantees that this won't go on at the moment, vaccines notwithstanding, and I think that there is a dialogue to be held urgently between the market towns in particular and the council about how car parking charges are dealt with, managed and structured in the future. And I think that's really urgent dialogue. Now to my question, which relates to paragraph 8.3 of the piece about risk. Basically what the section 1751 officer is saying is that part of the final budget setting paper in February, she will bring forward an assessment of the robustness of budget estimates and reserves to ensure the council maintains adequate provision given the level of financial risk. Now, I think that our job as a scrutiny committee is to look at risk and to challenge whether sufficient risk is being attributed to shortfalls because of funding and so on, and whether we're achieving the best quality as others have alluded to. What on earth do we mean by the word adequate? Do we mean that we are going to aspire to mediocrity, or do we mean that we're going to set the benchmark at excellence and then aspire to achieve an adequate degree of excellence? How do we define and measure adequate? Therein seem to me to be risk performance from this budget.
Councillor Biscoe, thank you. I've just seen a piece in the sort of chat box from Councillor Ellenbrook with regard to new organisational design. I suspect, Councillor Ellenbrook, I did mention the fact that this was an early budget preview, which was arranged specially for committee. I will flag that as something to be answered at the next session we have, if that's okay. So, Councillor Biscoe, thank you. Councillor Rushworth, you're up next.
Thank you, Jim. Before I want to speak about planning, but before I say that, I would like to agree with Councillor Biscoe on his comments about risk. I think he's thought it through well, and I share his concerns. Secondly, I really would just want to talk about planning, and I've got a lot of sympathy with Louise at the moment. You know, income is unpredictable. You don't know which way it goes. It's one of the only departments that has to be self-funding. We all know as members that the planning officers are under great pressure. It's taking longer to get decisions out. A lot of the staff are really suffering from stress. And what we have to remember is that when this pandemic finishes and we start coming out of it, planning plays a huge part in the early part of getting redevelopment and reinvestment back into Cornwall. And my concern is that if she has to make cuts because of the structure of what we're doing at the moment, you know, we won't be able to adapt to the speed of the decision making that will be required to get the best benefit out of people coming out. There's a wash of money out there. I mean, there's even people who advertise bridging loans, now saying you can borrow but there's no bridge in it, you can have the money as long as you want it, and it's really cheap fixed rate interest rate. So the opportunity when we come out of this with the wash of money that's been printed going into people who then want to reinvest it is going to be great, and we've got a great potential in, you know, to do that. But we do need a quick planning system when that comes forward. The other thing is I've got concerns about is about enforcement. There's more and more people doing things without planning permission, especially putting caravans in fields everywhere. I've got several in my area. It's taking a long time to get to with them, and I'm just worried that enforcement might be the first area that Louise has to cut, and in my opinion it should be the last. So I hope that, and my question is, I hope this that the committee would support some kind of financial payment to the planning department if we find that the chance of them being funding is becoming a problem. I know that when we
Councillor Rushworth.
All right, I know when the recovery does come that the income will start flowing in again quickly, but there may be a short-term thing that we may have to help with. Thank you.
Councillor Rushworth, thank you. I think the planning director did say earlier, Louise did say earlier, there was about a 750,000 shortfall at the moment, which I'm sure will be picked up. But points taken, thank you. Councillor Harris.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for allowing me to speak. You always reply it's a bit of a geeky question. I always get worried when I see a slide talking about technical accounting adjustments when we're trying to balance budget. But in particular, if somebody can explain what they mean by options for capital revenue funding switches, you know, in particular, we're not talking about capitalising revenue expenditure and just effectively kicking a problem further down the road, are we? Thank you.
Councillor Harris, thank you. I suspect we're probably talking about things like professional fees, which are used in the development of capital programme, but I'm sure that question can be answered shortly. So can I take one? Actually, no, I'll ask officers to pick up the questions that the last three councillors have asked first, and then Councillor Malcolm Brown, you'll be next.
Thank you. So, yeah, thank you. So I'll ask Glenn to come in respect of skills, but I don't disagree. I think skills is the key, or one of the keys to our future wealth and future ability for people across Cornwall to essentially earn enough money to have a reasonable or good living. I think in respect of car parks, I don't think that there is any appetite to have a structural change to car parking fees at this moment in time. Personally, I think that will have to come, but I don't think we know where we're going yet, and that's not the decision that we've taken in respect of fees and charges, but obviously in respect of the people's point of view. In respect of the wording in the report around Tracy's having to take a final position, I thought that the word was adequate was only in relation to the need to set a reasonable or adequate reserve, and not in respect of the way in which the council delivers its services. And I think what she's talking about is having to take a technical view about the risks that the organisation faces going forward and how much reserve we need to have in place, and adequate is only used in my view in respect in that context. I apologise for missing out that issue about organisational design. There is no future pattern yet for organisational redesign of this council. That is work that we will start to do as we go into next year. So it is too early to talk about what the future structure of the council might look like, and I apologise for that, but we just haven't done that work. Personally, I will bring Louise in, but I agree that the planning officers are under pressure, and Louise and I have been talking about that, and I know Louise is thinking about things that she could do to help mitigate it. It is difficult, that balance, in terms of a service which is entirely or nearly entirely funded by income, has to react more quickly when budgets change than services which are actually paid for mainly through a budget that the council sets, and I think that's difficult. And I agree that as we're seeing now, actually, as you bounce back, as we had done a little bit, you know, planning needs to be there to lead that field. I think in just my only comment in respect of caravans in fields, I know it was just an example related to enforcement, but I think that's a direct result of people finding ways to house themselves mainly. It's a consequence of our housing shortage across Cornwall. In terms of Councillor Harris's questions around capital versus revenue, I think we have to be really mindful not to kick the can down the road. And if we use capital in the very short term, it should only be used to transform revenue services, or where we are allowed to do it. For example, we have a business rate pilot scheme that allows us to convert capital that comes in respect of road maintenance into road maintenance that is revenue items rather than capital items. But I agree. The other thing we do need to do is to be able to capitalise as much time as possible to projects where those projects are genuine capital projects, and we haven't been entirely as efficient as we can in doing that in the past. But Glenn, perhaps on skills, and just Louise to comment on planning. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you, Chair. So just a reflection on Councillor Biscoe's point on skills and how it might relate to the budget. So I think if we take a kind of 20-year complete view of what we've done with the EU programme funding, we have made good investments. We have made significant progress in terms of the economy of Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly has grown, in particular sectors have grown. But if we also look back with a critical eye, we haven't fundamentally closed the gap in terms of productivity, earnings, certainly with the rest of the UK and the South East in particular. And part of that is because we haven't shifted some of the ingrained inclusion, skills and aspiration issues. If you think about the index multiple deprivation and what that says about particular communities and the challenges and the poverty they face. And I think there is an opportunity to perhaps do more, linking skills development to infrastructure development through Shared Prosperity Fund in a way that we haven't been able to before, because they've been separate funds, and particularly with skills, we've not had the ability in a devolution sense, in a decision-making sense, to tailor some of that skills investment. So I think there is a big opportunity to reshape what we do with skills. And we will need to do that if we're going to learn the lessons of why we haven't shifted some of those data sets around indexable multiple deprivation from the past, and how we reskill and refocus people in terms of the skills they have and the sectors that are growing in the future. In terms of how that relates to the budget, I think we need to be really clear that we cannot deliver our economic development strategy and do all of that with capital alone. One of the strengths that we've had with the current Economic Development Match Fund Reserve, as Phil rightly says, is coming to an end, is that has had revenue in it through underspends and through capital receipts being treated as revenue because it's income. We've been able to use some of that to match fund revenue projects. And I think as we construct budgets to match fund Shared Prosperity Fund and other things, other investments in the future, we need to be really mindful that to do some of that skills development, we will have to invest in things other than capital. So I think that's a really important point for how we structure services and programmes and projects in the future.
Glenn, thank you. Next on the list is Councillor Malcolm Brown, followed by Councillors Thomas and Robinson.
Yes, I want to follow up on Councillor Rushworth's point about planning, which I agree with completely. And it's a question for Louise Wood, specifically about the way that planning fees are set. Now, as far back as I can remember, this isn't a problem which started with this government. It goes back historically. I think the way that government has reviewed and updated planning fees has placed local authorities in very, very difficult situations. And I was just wondering what representations we're either making to government direct or through the local government association, either say for an annual automatic update of planning fees that, I don't know, might be related to the retail price index or whatever, or even better, perhaps, more discretion for local authorities to be able to set their own planning fees. You'd have thought government might listen to this, given the emphasis on that they're rightly placing on the need for investment. And it's obvious at the moment that if the planning service is under-resourced, that is bound to slow down the processing of applications which government want to be dealt with. Thank you.
Malcolm, thank you very much. Louise will pick that up shortly, I'm sure. Councillor Thomas, Mike Thomas.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Phil et al., for that presentation. I'd like to sort of return to the point raised by Councillor LeBroy in relation to the Simon Reeve 2 one-hour programmes about Cornwall, and I'm assuming everyone has watched it, and if they haven't, could I perhaps urge them to do? I will confess I've only seen part 1, and I'm looking forward to look at part 2. It's really links in my mind to everything that we're discussing in this budget item. And I just wonder whether, Phil, it's been considered to have a media release to actually respond to the issues raised in those programmes, because although it's on BBC Two, it'll be available on the iPlayer for over a year, and it's already being referenced in the press. I'm of the feeling that we should be using it as a way for engaging, having dialogue with the public, to remind them that Cornwall Council isn't just about bin collections, planning, caring very much for our community in a physical sense, but also about all the investment programs and issues that Glenn has identified with, and the technical issues of funding. That here is an opportunity, in my opinion, that a public broadcaster, which we all pay to with our licence fee, has actually come and spent time in our duchy. I mean, how many counties, and that you did get that wrong, I must admit, how many areas of the UK have had that sort of focus? And it in my mind, offers the opportunity for a dialogue to explain how, or describe how similar some of our issues are to the issues that our friends in the north are facing. So I just wonder, Phil, whether it's been considered to respond to that public broadcast by the BBC that I found very, very moving in parts, and particularly the point Cornwall has jobs but no careers. And I think we need to demonstrate that as a local authority, we are addressing that with all the various schemes and issues that we are dealing with, especially places like Goonhilly, the spaceport and other areas. Thank you.
Councillor Thomas, thank you. Councillor Robinson.
Yeah, thanks. Just trying to get everything on. In a way, what I'm not sort of change my mind in the sort of question I want to ask, and it'll scoop up, I suppose, this definition of adequate that was raised a minute ago, but also possibly approaching what Barbara maybe was trying to get at as well. You know, with my background, I have over the years gone through a lot of change and had to manage a lot of that change myself within the Ministry of Defence. You know, I'm used to seeing fairly dramatic levels of change, but that change, although often it was budget driven, in that change, you know, we at a very, very early stage worked out what we saw as our level of ambition and how that level of ambition had to be tailored to meet actually what was being required of us. And in a way, I don't really see that yet in this, and it's very difficult to move forward unless you have got a reasonably clear vision of what the end point is going to be like, what the structure is going to be like, what the manning requirements is, what the training requirements are, and how that is going to deliver the product that is required of us. And I don't really see any of that in here. And indeed, I would almost say the level of ambition that might be described by this is particularly low whenever we look at the vacancy budget reduction. And yes, of course, budget managers are carrying significant vacancies, but maybe we ought to be looking about how we would manage what we have to deliver with even greater number of vacancies. We haven't really properly mapped that out, and it's very difficult to start any serious consideration of these problems without understanding is where you really believe you are going to end up in terms of the funding available to deliver what is expected of us, and the outline structure that's going to be like, and also looking about the reduction in targeted reduction of budgeted posts through targeted voluntary severance. Again, I see that we have started a process here, but I would like to see some detail in that, and indeed how it's going to affect posts right across the management structure and the grade level. And so, yeah, I've run out of time. Okay, good. I'll leave it at that.
So, Councillor Robinson, just to be clear, you're interested in looking at the staffing side, but particularly the sort of percentage really of vacant posts that the council runs with as a means possibly of avoiding further cuts if it's done properly?
Yes and no. What I mean is that you just get this process rolling properly. You have to have a clearer understanding of what the end point is going to be. And I don't see any of that there. I see lots of good words through the years 2 to 4 piece, and a lot of this is is okay, but it has to be set against a particular context and an endpoint. What do we think we're going to look like? Okay, and then we work backwards, and it's not there.
Thank you. Okay, can I invite officers to respond to Councillors Brown, Thomas and Robinson, please?
Can Louise come in first to Malcolm Brown's point, please?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, so if I just briefly come back, and I'll just pick a bit up on Stephen's earlier point, which I didn't come in on. So yeah, I think in terms of the budget position and staffing, we completed a management restructure earlier this year. So a bulk of our MTFP savings, obviously the world's a bit different, but in that space were early in that period. So we have made a lot of change to meet the bulk of those the savings that we had already, and that's bedding down. I think in terms of the kind of broader issue of capacity in that kind of frontline piece, yes, it is true. We have, officers are working very hard to keep on top of the workloads that are coming in. And part of that, it's not really just a straight line of saying, therefore there's more work and that's change. It's partly about the changing working practices, and we see a bit of lost productivity in that. So that kind of working from home is leading to, for various reasons, things taking a bit longer. And that's part of that piece then around working out how we resolve that. So there's a technology piece there. So, a simple example of that is an app that officers can access when they go out and do site visits, which will save some time in double handling photographs and stuff into our system. So in that space, there are those types of things that we're looking at to see how we can make things easier for people. I take the point about enforcement. The difficulty with enforcement is that it's not funded. It's funded through our other work. So it's always a juggle, isn't it, about how we balance those budgets, and that becomes a conversation that we have when we look at that. I think that in terms of fees, Malcolm, specifically, yes, we regularly raise that. So the government was really interested in fees a while back, and they were asking for opinions. We provided some of our data on some of our charges that come in, and they were looking at locally set fees, but that was sort of before the recent planning reform white paper. But what I do know now is that in taking forward the reforms, what we understand is going to happen is there will be a series of pilot type projects and opportunity through the local government association, the specific bit of that for planning called PAS, Planning Advisory Service, for us to be part of looking at some of those and to be part of working groups. So at the moment, I suppose it's my emphasis of trying to get involved in some of those things so we can continue making that piece. It would be very good if we could at least do annual inflationary increases in planning fees, and we've said that many times, and hopefully they might pick up on that piece in the future.
Okay.
Thank you.
Louise, thank you.
So if I could just respond to Councillor Thomas. Yeah, I think those programmes are pretty good. There's some bits that you feel a bit annoyed about, but actually in terms of the accuracy of you know, media coming in and looking, it's been pretty good. Your point around do we use it to raise a dialogue with residents of Cornwall, I think is a really good point, and one that I'll take away and discuss with our portfolio holders to see what that opportunity could look like and how we might be able to create a dialogue from it, because I'm not always sure that things like press releases and press responses are the best way to do that. But your point around using it as a real opportunity to talk to the residents is a really good one. So happy to take that away. In terms of Councillor Robinson's point, I think he's absolutely right. Two or three points, I think, in response to that. Yes, the idea of developing the target operating model is to do just that, to have, in a sense, a view of what the organisation will look like, translating the priorities which we're setting as a council into what would the organisation look like. That is the job of a target operating model, but we're not there yet. And I think in justification of not being there yet, we are a council which is extraordinarily large and diverse. And effectively, this is like running something like 100 to 150 different companies, all at the same time under one organisational umbrella. We are very, very varied. So this is taking some time, and we will get to that next year, but we are not there yet. Bottom-up change is what we've been trying to do, certainly within the services that I've been responsible for. So Louise's current organisation of planning is based around a localised approach, which we got a team together over, I think, at least 6 months, and that team of frontline staff helped put that in place and work it up. So we need to allow space for the people on the front line to be absolutely involved in this, as well as our customers. So we have to also do some of this from the bottom up. So my point being that this is an initial stage, not where we need to be. And I agree with Councillor Robinson that we need to get to a place where we have a clear view about what the organisation will look like in the future. I think that's covered all of the points. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Phil, thank you. I now have a final batch. Councillors McLennan, Duffin and Ekin-Smythe. Councillor McLennan, please.
Thank you, Chair. I was really pleased to see that Phil mentioned duplication. It's been one of my points in the almost 4 years here now that I find very strange that it's not been looked at. I did mention it to the CEO, and I think assistant came back to me and asked me for ideas. Well, yeah, it's a long job, but it needs to be done. The point about Louise mentioned about it costs us to do the enforcement. Am I naive in thinking the enforcement officers get paid a salary? So I don't understand that point. And thirdly, all the comments you're making, which I welcome about the change, what would have happened if COVID hadn't occurred? Would we still be going along as we were and not looking at the way we're working, etc.? Thank you.
Councillor McLennan, thank you. Councillor Duffin.
Thank you. Sorry, just getting there. I was interested in the conversations that people have been having about skills, because if you look on page 43 of our pack, we've got the capacity to deliver housing and workspace inquiry update. And the first item on there is for Cornwall Council to implement a senior level form of governance to manage the recommendations, and the current status of that is red. And the third one down, the business growth, we're red. if this is such a high priority and everybody is saying that this is what we need to do, this is going to provide the growth and the jobs in Cornwall, the things that Simon Reeve picked up on when there were no careers but jobs. Why is this not so much more important? Why are we in red? It just doesn't tie in for me. It feels like we're doing a lot of talking and not actually prioritising the things that we're saying are important.
Okay. Councillor Duffin, thank you. And Councillor Ekin-Smythe, please.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I want to thank Phil and his team for the report. I think it's very, very interesting. And by this morning's colleagues for some of the comments they've been making. I've got particular sympathy with the comments that were made by Councillor Robinson. It seems to me that listening to all this, we are in the sort of exaggerated no-win situation that we've been in for the last 10 years. And what worries me particularly is public perception. There's already out there a deep cynicism of how councils operate and so on. And it seems to me that, as was suggested by Councillor Olivier, if we do very well in saving the all services at a much lower cost, then we'll be asked why that wasn't happening before. And if we don't, we'll be told that we're not very good at managing ourselves. So it's a no-win situation, which I well understand. I think it's important that somehow or other we manage the public perception. We have, as we all know, another operation going on. What Cornwall wants is being asked, and somehow or other what we finish up with as a result of the economic reviews has to be somewhere along the lines of what comes out of what Cornwall wants, I suspect. Otherwise, there's going to be a big gap in the middle. I just wanted to ask really the overall question, are we ensuring that this public perception area is managed? Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Ekin-Smythe, thank you. And finally, Councillor Rand, I understand somewhere in the background you're lurking with a request for a question. So if it could be concise, that would be appreciated.
Thank you very much, Chairman. If you can hear me, I hope
can, yes.
Conflicting any protocol in this. And I, as you may know, I'm sit on the CorServe board as a NED. I've also been recently appointed as a NED on the CDC board. So I do have a question, and it's regarding CDC and this end date that was mentioned. CDC is a specialist team, and in my view, there is and will always be a need for such a specialist team, particularly given that we rely so much on funding, and we have relied so much on funding. As you know, I've been working with CDC since 2008 through the West Cornwall Local Action Group, and I've chaired that since 2013. CDC has provided extremely good facilitation for the volunteer boards, and without them I doubt whether we would have maintained them. It provides an essential accountable body structure, which again is a necessity, certainly as far as the European funding is concerned, and they built up a superb level of expertise in applying for grant funding and administrating the programmes and ensuring that the programmes have been fully compliant, so there's been no clawbacks. So there is a need, in my view, for a specialist team. We already have it. Why are we considering winding up CDC? And if we are, can we please ensure that this team is maintained? That's my question. Thank you, sir.
Councillor Rand, thank you. I'm not sure, well, I guess I'll be interested in Glenn's comments to yours, although as an officer, it's possibly best asked of Councillor Dwelly later when we have cabinet member questions. For the benefit of any public watching, a NED is a non-executive director of a company, of which Councillor Rand holds a number of such positions. So officers, Phil, can you start me off with the responses, please?
Yeah, could I just ask Louise to comment about her costs, her comment about costs of enforcement for Councillor McClenning as a start, please?
Yeah, that's fine. So Councillor McLennan, I mean, simplistically, the salaries of planning enforcement officers are paid for from planning application income fee. So planning enforcement in itself does not generate an income. It's part of our service that's paid for by income from the fee base that we get in. And in terms of planning application fee income, part of the problem that we've been having over the recent years is the structure of the fees and the type of work coming in. So we've seen less bigger sites coming in, and that's where we get bigger fees, to more smaller sites, so single dwellings, extensions, that type of structure fee. That's a smaller fee, and in quite a lot of cases for that work, the fee that we get doesn't cover the work that we need to do to make that decision. But those fees are set by government, so I can't change them. I can only change some of my discretionary stuff around the edges. So simplistically, yes, obviously enforcement colleagues are paid a salary and they do that and they do their work, but in terms of thinking about that wider workforce capacity, where do I focus my resource? That's the balance that I make in terms of what income have I got coming in, and therefore how much work and capacity can I do, and where should I put that effort, and that's how it works. So hopefully that provides you a bit of clarity.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Louise. Thank you. Thank you,
Louise. Thank you.
Thank you. Could I then ask Glenn to come in to speak to Councillor Duffin's point, and then I'll go back and I'll make sure all the rest of the questions are answered.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you, Chair. So I think it's split. Just looking at page 43, I think that Councillor Duffin referred to. I think this is probably an answer that is split between John Lloyd Owen and I. So in terms of the construction work, we have made progress with that, and as it says in the commentary, we have built the Building Cornwall website, and it is a helpful resource. Some of the actions are read as a result of partly the COVID pandemic, but also partly identifying resources to take that website and take the actions around developing construction as a career of choice to the next level. So we've done what we can within existing resources. We are trying to identify additional resources to support that. The question around strategic pipeline of capital projects is the one that John Lloyd Owen might have a view on. I think from my point of view, we have tried to do that, but clearly with COVID delays and potential disruptions to funding schemes, that has been quite difficult to do with any level of certainty, and therefore that is a task which we haven't stopped, that is continuing to be done, and we're trying to create not only clarity in a procurement sense for the construction industry, but also a longer list of capital schemes that may well feed into the first year of a shared prosperity fund. So for two reasons: one, clarity of what's going to be available in the future, but also to drive economic growth. This is a priority, but of course construction in the supply chain has been impacted, and that's partly why you're seeing it as red, but John Lloyd Owen might have other comments on that.
Nothing in particular to add. I mean, I think Glenn's covered the point. I think it is very timely now as we move through recovery to revisit the work that was done to seek to capture a wide range of significant capital projects, whether those are housing or other capital projects that are planned in Cornwall over coming years, and to use that as a basis for providing opportunities to the construction industry, but also identifying future skills and training needs. So I think it's timely now, as we move through recovery, to look at how those plans have changed and to capture a current position.
Can I just comment, Chair, also on the feasibility? Thank you. The feasibility study for the Cornwall Centre of Excellence, again, that's in red. I mean, just think this is one of these key things that will help us come out of the issues that we've had with the pandemic. And I just really think it's a time the council should be being brave and getting on and doing it, and it could make such a big difference.
Thank you.
Thank you. So
Yeah, go on.
Can I just continue to finish answering those questions? So Councillor McClenning asked, what if no COVID? We would be having to do this transformational work in any case, because budgets, in terms of the amount of money that we need to fund services as they currently are, because of demand pressures and budget pressures, we would be having to do this work anyway. But COVID has added financial pressures, and added financial pressures earlier than we would have had to do anyway. So there's more to take out earlier, and we need to think how to do that. And some of that will be investing in change and in those things that we need to do to make change. But we would have had to do this anyway. Councillor Ekin-Smythe pointed out that it is difficult in terms of the our job to make this change in terms of public perception. We are constantly worried about the way in which we're perceived by our residents, and as you say, what Cornwall wants work is trying to address that, at least in part. In terms of our directorate, we have actually employed directly, but cited within our communications team, somebody to help us work on the communication of why we need growth in Cornwall, particularly to ensure that we can operate services into the future, and why we need that to help our residents and communities in Cornwall. So we are constantly trying to put work and effort into getting those messages across. In terms of Councillor Rand's point about Cornwall Development Company, the budget position is in respect of the Commission, not in respect of the company. So the withdrawal of the Commission just reflects the reduction in funding from Europe as we go forwards. The question of whether CDC will continue to be here for us or not is a separate question to this budget presentation, and will be a decision for both the CoreServe group and the council as we go forward, and it's not really to discuss in respect of this budget paper and presentation. But what I do agree with is that there are some excellent skills within the organisation, and whatever happens to our structures and our companies as we go forward, we will need to ensure that we keep and retain the right skills, because we will have future programmes, hopefully under shared prosperity and other measures, of investment in economic growth, and that is, I believe, a priority for Cornwall. So I agree that we will need to keep those skills, wherever that might sit in an organisation. Thank you. I think I've covered the points.
Phil, thank you. Can I also thank your colleagues for their sort of open and straightforward responses, and Tracy Stepney for pulling this together. Can I flag that we would welcome, on the assumption it is happening with other overview and scrutiny committees, a further briefing in December as things develop. If there is something being done corporately, then obviously this committee would welcome participating in that. We are asked, in terms of recommendation, to consider the report and information provided, and provide officers with comments for consideration in developing the budget. You've had some of those, I think, but can I just flag two things from my perspective, just picking up Councillor Brown's point in relation to planning fees. I'd like to think committee would support lobbying government to increase autonomy on that, but we can test that with a vote shortly if we need a vote. And I think secondly, vacancy levels, which was in part what Councillor Robinson flagged, 2 or possibly 3% is relatively low, I think, certainly in my previous experience. I wonder if that could be reviewed to see whether that might be an alternative in terms of staging reductions, rather than necessarily having to do them in a big hit to catch it with next year's budget. So can I, from my perspective then, Phil, can you pick those two things up? And anything else you've got on the basis of member questions, please. You don't have to respond now, it's just really feeding them into the process.
Yeah, so my only comment is that the setting of a 3% vacancy level for EG&D, Economic Growth and Development, doesn't have an impact because we're already under that level. So really it's not something that affects this directorate particularly, but it is a wider point for other services across the council.
I think we might appreciate it being fed in, as it appears relatively low given the scale of the challenges we face. Okay, Lynn, do we need to take a vote on this? Can we simply welcome the report and thank officers for their efforts?
Chairman, we've got a recommendation there. I slightly changed it and I'll just read it to you. So it's that the Strategic Director for Economic Growth and Development consider the comments outlined within the minutes. So I'll pick up the comments and to include them where possible within the development of the budget. And we could actually take a vote on that.
If we must. Okay. Councillor Phil, Councillor Biscoe is suggesting
would need to put that forward as a proposal and a seconder.
Councillor Biscoe would.
Are you asking me to say what I think?
What I'm trying to do is deal with the end of this item because we're running behind. So can you make it reasonably succinct, please? That would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel that given the paucity of the information in the paragraph about risk, and to be honest with you, much as I respect Phil, I didn't quite buy his interpretation of the sentence in the paragraph we discussed. I feel that given the nature of the change, particularly around automation and around organisation, that it would be helpful to the committee in coming to a view through the budget process if we were able to have a more informed and discussion about the sorts of risks that are likely to come organisationally, operationally and financially.
Okay, thank you. And I thank you for that, Councillor Biscoe. I did note early on that we are a month ahead, I guess, or mainly a month ahead of other committees in relation to this. So I'm certain Phil will take that away with regards to maybe a slightly more fully formed response. So Lynn, can you advise now, please?
Yeah, I can. So it's been proposed by Councillor LeBroy and seconded by Councillor Joyce Duffin. I'll just read out what I said. So it's a recommendation that the Strategic Director for Economic Growth and Development consider the comments outlined by the Overview and Scrutiny Committee and to include them within the development of the budget.
Okay, thank you. I think if we could add in, or Phil, can I just check, you're taking away for further work Bert's comment in relation to risk, the nature of it and so forth and the impact?
Yes, I am doing.
Thank you. In which case, Lynn, I'm happy to take a vote, bearing in mind it's been proposed by Councillor Boyce, seconded by Councillor Duffin on the recommendation you responded to, and Councillor Pollard now wishes to make a point before we do that. Councillor Pollard?
I'm just eager that we include the bit about risk in the recommendation. So I know Phil will take it away, but I think it's a significant matter, and we are in a privileged position. It can come back to us in 4 weeks, but it needs to be part of the recommendation.
I'm suggesting that as a proposal to add to the recommendation, Chairman.
Do you have a sentence in which that can be encompassed, Councillor Biscoe?
That due to the inadequacy of the description of risk in the report, and bearing in mind the fundamental changes and transformations that are proposed, that we would like to have a briefing to the committee about the risks that are inherent in this budget approach.
Okay, so the committee receive a briefing.
You might want to boil it down to that, Chairman, if you want to be prosaic.
No,
happy to include, Chair.
Fine. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Roy.
Councillor Broy has welcomed that. Councillor Duffin I'm hoping is about to do the same.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. So could we go with a roll call then, please, on that with that addition in relation to the recommendation, please?
Thank you very much. I'll go to Councillor Biscoe first, please.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Brown.
4.
Councillor Cole.
4.
Councillor Duffin.
4.
Councillor Ellenbrook.
4.
Councillor Ecclesmie.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Robinson.
4.
Councillor LeBroy.
4.
Councillor McKenna.
4.
Councillor McLennan.
4.
Councillor Olivier.
4.
Councillor Pascoe. 4. Councillor Pollard.
4.
Councillor Rushworth.
4.
Councillor Thomas.
4.
Thank you, Chairman. That's unanimous.
Thank you. I just want to check on Councillor Thomas's welfare. Are you okay, Mike?
Yes, just practicing my singing voice.
Oh, excellent, good work. Okay, that takes us on then to item 6, which is Cornwall Council Housing Allocations Policy, the impact of policy changes. Mel Brain, I believe, is going to talk us through this, after which time we should have a little time for member questions. So, Mel, are you ready to go?
I am. I'll take myself off mute. That will help. So let me. Okay, is everybody able to see the slides?
Yeah, we can now. That's great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to talk about Cornwall Home Choice and allocations. And you may recall that we talked about this, I think it was January 2019. So the presentation that I'm giving is following the same format so that you can compare it to what we talked about last time. So as a reminder, the policies that we have are Cornwall Home Choice Scheme, and this applies a common assessment framework for all applicants who register for social housing in Cornwall. And then we have a Cornwall Council allocation policy, and that sets criteria specifically for the letting of our own council homes and any homes to which the council has nomination rights. Where we don't have a nomination right to a policy, to a home, the registered providers use their own allocation policies. So you have an overarching home choice scheme for assessment, and then you have specific allocation policies dependent on who owns the home and nomination rights. So a brief background to the changes. In 2014, a new common housing assessment framework and allocations policy was introduced. And the aim was to have an open, simple and transparent route to apply and bid for affordable homes in Cornwall. A new policy was implemented in January 2018, and we conducted and shared with you an initial review in 2019. And the key policy changes that were made related to qualification, i.e. who can join the housing register, banding, which is connected to how we assess people's housing need, bidding, which is how people place bids for properties they're interested in, local connection and refusals. So to move on to the impacts. So as at 6th of January 2020, the total number of applicants has reduced by 179%, and the applicants able to bid has reduced by 222% since September 2017. This equates to 8,791 less applicants on the register. Partially, this was due to a data cleansing exercise that we did in January 2018 when the policy changed. And in January 2020, just before we did the snapshot, whereby inactive users who weren't bidding were removed from the system. And this is a fluctuating number. It goes up and down daily. And the reason there will be a difference between the number of applicants and the applicants able to bid will be because generally there's always a group of applicants who've made the application but not provided all of the information that is needed in order to complete the assessment, and they're unable to bid until that assessment is completed. So in terms of applicant type, it's very similar to what we looked at in September 2017, so pre the policy changes. The key thing that has changed is the number of homeless applications. So we had 1% of people on the housing register in September 2017 had homeless applications, and in January 2020 that's increased to 2.3%. And we have specifically looked at January 2020 so that we don't take into account the impact of COVID, because that would distort the number of applications that we have. So the number of homeless applications has increased. This could be a result of increased financial pressure over the Christmas period into the January when we took the snapshot, combined with increasing living costs and welfare reform. But it's also worth noting that the Homelessness Reduction Act came into effect on the 3rd of April 2018. That gave us new duties to prevent and relieve homelessness, and a requirement to carry out an assessment and deliver personalised housing plans. And it also gave public bodies a duty to refer people who they know are threatened with homelessness. So the rise in homelessness applications could be a result of increased referrals from other agencies, but also because individuals are trusting the local authority will now have to act to relieve their homelessness. And the reason that you would see that increase through the housing register is because personalised housing plans will actively encourage people to make housing register applications as a means of relieving their homelessness status. In general, though, the general needs applicant data and the transfer data has remained pretty much the same as it was previously. So in terms of qualification, when we looked at this just over a year ago in 2019, there were 65 live applications with declared savings and investments exceeding 50,000 and none that were cancelled, aborted or suspended. What you will now see is that we have no live applications with a declared savings and investment in excess of 50,000, and we've had a number of cancelled, aborted and suspended cases. And the threshold there, the financial threshold, is one of the qualifying criteria for joining the housing register. So it's showing that this has now been implemented and is having an impact on the applicants on the register. It's worth noting, however, that the financial qualification threshold does adversely impact on some people who require specialist accommodation with care and support. So they may have finances that are above the threshold, but those finances may be insufficient to purchase that specialised accommodation on the open market. We've also had 522 applications received since January 2018, where they've declared legal action for a breach in tenancy, and 105 of those are currently live applications, but they're looked at very carefully to determine whether they are eligible to qualify for the housing register. So in terms of banding, you'll see that Band A applicants increased by 484%, and that was a similar picture to when we looked at it before. Band B has decreased, as has Band C and all of the other bands. We've also removed a low welfare priority, which means that applicants who do qualify for a welfare priority will now be in Band A or B instead of C or D. So that will also impact on the increase in Band A. The other reason Band A has increased is because we put people who were under occupying into that banding. But as we'll see, that's not necessarily turning into people actively moving into suitably sized accommodation. So when we look at lettings, we have seen an increase in lettings to Band A and Band C particularly. Band C has our homeless applicants in it, and as I've already referred to, the Homelessness Reduction Act means that they now have a personalised housing plan, and the prevention and engagement officers are actively supporting people or households who are homeless to bid on the housing register. So when we looked at this in 2019, we'd seen a reduction in the number of allocations to people in Band C, which included our homeless applicants. But because we are now proactively supporting them to make those bids, we've seen the increase back again. It's worth noting that despite that significant increase in Band A and despite seeing the lettings increase to applicants in Band A, only 2% of applicants in Band A are actually bidding at the moment. Overall bidding has increased, so the people who've probably been removed from the housing register because they weren't bidding probably weren't actively seeking a home. So we're left with a register now where a higher percentage of people are actively bidding because they are actively looking for alternative accommodation. And like I say, we're also seeing increased bidding because of the activity of the prevention and engagement team. We noted in 2019 that we had seen an increase in properties that were receiving no bids. And one of the changes that was made when the policy was implemented was a reduction in the number of bids that applicants could make. And one of the assumptions was that if people only had one bid, they would look at the properties they were most likely to get and switch their bids around. That doesn't appear to have been the case. This is a similar number to the number of properties we saw last year with no bids. It has a particular impact primarily in the east of the district, but also particularly for flats and Cornwall Housing, Live West and the Sanctuary are the providers who are most impacted by properties not receiving bids. So it is the reduction in bids that people were given hasn't worked out in the way that we had anticipated that it would. We've also looked at local connection. So we haven't seen significant changes, but we've seen a slight increase in the number of applicants who have the 3-year connection to Cornwall and who have a 1-year connection to Cornwall. So 3 years is the standard connection that you need in order to be eligible under the Cornwall Council allocation policy for a council-owned home or a home that we have nomination rights to. But connection is quite complicated, as you can see here. Local connection qualification criteria is important, but the current policy is confusing for people. There's a multi-layer local connection criteria, both within bands and across bands, that's applied dependent upon where the property is. So people who are seeking social housing find it quite confusing to understand which applies when. And the transparency and accountability of the system can be undermined by the confusion, and the policy is not understandable to the majority of people. In terms of refusals, the policy introduced removal of applicants who had refused 2 properties. So since going live in 2018, 44 applicants have been removed for this. We haven't carried out the exercise for over a year, but there are plans to repeat it as soon as possible. There are clearly some sensitivities around how we do that, because it may be that there are legitimate reasons, but they are always explored in detail before determining whether that refusal should count as part of this policy. So a summary of the key impacts: we've seen a 55% reduction in applicants assessed and able to bid. We have, though, seen an increase in the number of households who are bidding, but disproportionately fewer Band A applicants bidding, given the significant increase in the number of Band A applicants. We've seen an increase in allocation to Band C applicants, which includes our homeless households, and this is partly due to the active encouragement via prevention and engagement as part of personalised housing plans. We've seen a decrease in bids per property, but an increase in the number of properties with no bids. There's been a negligible change in the number of households with a local connection, and local connection is complicated and difficult for applicants to understand. We carried out some consultation with our home choice partners. They continue to express frustration with the lack of agility of both the home choice partnership and the IT system in making service improvements, but they would welcome an opportunity to develop a more flexible and agile marketplace, which could address multiple tenures and differing levels of housing need. So we've made a number of proposals that could be considered. The first set of practical proposals, which could be looked at quite quickly and wouldn't at this stage require any consultation to do them. The first is to remove the restriction on the number of bids permitted. And that's something that applicants have said they would welcome. The second, which I haven't picked up previously, is to apply an exception to households under our Syrian Vulnerable Persons Resettlement Programme from the 3-year local connection criteria. We've taken a number of households under this programme, but we then have difficulty moving them on from temporary accommodation because they're not eligible under our home choice policy. But if we were able to make an exception for them, we would be able to take more families and support them to move on. We think we should commence a review of the home choice allocations IT system to ensure it is fit for purpose and able to meet the dynamic and agile requirements of the home choice partnership. And we would like to work with the home choice registered provider partners to agree a development roadmap which looks at a range of issues which could improve performance and delivery of home choice. There are also some substantive areas for review. These would require consultation because they would be deemed to be material changes to the allocations policy. So we're proposing that we should consult on reviewing and simplifying the application of local connection criteria. And to be clear, we are not suggesting that we should dispose of local connection criteria, but just that it should be reviewed and simplified if the consultation indicates support for that. That we should review and adjust the banding for applicants who are homeless or who are social tenants in Cornwall and are under occupying their home, because it's creating imbalances in the way that allocations are turning out. And we should introduce a specialist accommodation allocations policy that relaxes qualification and local connection criteria where there is evidence need for care and specialist accommodation provision. So that would apply to things like extra care housing and to supported living for people with learning disabilities, etc. So that's the end of my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions.
Mel, thank you. That was eye-opening and really interesting, and has already excited some interest from members. So I'll go through the list as I have it. Councillor Olivier first.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I have to say I find it completely unsurprising that restricting applicants to one bid has meant a number of properties aren't bid for at all. The 26 mentioned in Penzance, I should imagine 25 of them are in my division, and I can think of which ones they are without too much trouble. So that was a mistake to do that. It's obvious that people should be allowed at least 2 bids, one for their ideal and one for which is tolerable to put it. So I don't know why we did that. It was certainly not something I supported. The wording, when we talk about us being, having a fit and agile marketplace approach, I just don't really like, marketplace, inverted commas. How about a fit and agile needs-based approach? I agree with simplifying the local criteria, the local connection criteria, because I've come across a number of problems where the complexity of them has obstructed helping people. I'd also like to reiterate the point that when we talk about high needs and less high needs, so A and B are high needs, C and D or E are less high needs, just don't forget how much in need. A band C can be a young family on an upper floor with no access to garden or play space and who are deemed to be overcrowded using the strict criteria for that, and they're still only a band C. So I don't want to sort of in any way minimise the, or even by implication, the fact that C, D and even E are in need. Don't forget people living in low quality, insecure, private rented accommodation who want a social home will count as band E, but their need is very genuine, as we all know, if we read the private rented sector inquiry report. But I think this is rectifying some past mistakes, the recommendations. So on the whole, I'm in agreement with them. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Olivier, thank you. Councillor Mike Thomas.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the presentation, Mel. One request, although you explain within the document about the difference between A, B, C and D, but the bandings, is it possible for a simple legend to be created that could go on slides and possibly even in planning documents? Because people with short memory or people looking at stuff for the first time won't automatically be able to recall the difference between the various bands. So just a request whether a small legend could be created that could be used in documents like this one and in planning. Perhaps if Louise, if she's still listening. My question is, are all housing associations based in Cornwall or working in Cornwall, are they all currently on the Home Choice Register?
Councillor Thomas, thank you. Councillor Cole, you're next. You did signal you had a number of points to make, so you'll be allowed slightly more latitude in terms of timing. Assuming you're still with us.
There you go. I've unmuted myself properly. Thank you. Thank you for the actual presentation. I note there was some more detail in the presentation than there was actually in the report, such as the information on places that didn't receive bids. So it'd be interesting to get more deep into that. Going through the actual report, though, obviously I looked at the impacts, and the first thing that jumped out at me was talking about the massive rise in Band A. And as you said in your presentation, that was because we've included people that in council or registered provider accommodation that need to downsize. That wasn't actually in the report, though you actually mentioned it in the presentation. So I'm glad that's sorted. I share Cornelius's view about the only one bid. I remember arguing against it repeatedly in the past, and it is important that that is got rid of. The example I always give is in my division. Prior to it coming in, there was a development of 8 units. They were all 2 beds. They were 2-bed houses and 2-bed flats, 4 of each. And when this system is in, the people would have only been able to apply for houses or flats when they should have applied for both and had a good system running through. So I do welcome that. In the report itself, there's a lot of reference to local connection, but it doesn't get under the grip of the sort of the parish connection, which goes with the Cornwall connection. Again, you addressed that in the presentation, and I think we need to get under the skin of that much more. Also, you referenced about the IT system. I put the word clunky down. I actually share the pain because I've been seeking information about home choice statistics, trying to get questions asked, and I've had the questions, well, if I was being cheeky, I'd say the computer says no. And you know, when you want data to come out, whether it's to understand the need in your area, to understand when planning applications are in, so I do fully get that needs to change. But I would say obviously the allocation system is one thing, and having an IT system that's below is not working are 2 separate things, and we mustn't conflate the 2. Policy and IT are different. In terms of your practical amendments, I look forward to finding out more about the Syrian Vulnerable Persons Resettlement Scheme, and I got to ask the statement going on about working with providers, partners to agree a development roadmap looking at a range of issues to provide performance and delivery. That says everything and nothing, so I'd really seek some clarity on what that actually means. Going on to the substantive areas for review, again, I welcome the fact that you talked about you weren't looking to undermine the local connection criteria, but you wanted to simplify it. Again, I would say prior to the reviews, if you go back a couple of councils, it was better, it was simpler, but it got changed. And again, I would like to see it revert to something more simple. But rather than saying review and simplification, I'd like to talk about perhaps strengthening and simplifying. Again, you're talking about reviewing banding for homeless and under occupiers. Again, I'm confused there because the under occupiers have already been put into Band A last time, so I'm not sure what we're talking about there exactly. And again, with specialist accommodation, relaxing local connection criteria, I think there's scope to discuss that, but I think we need to be clear, what are we talking about? I presume we're talking about adapted properties that suit specific needs. I wouldn't want to see that extended to, for example, accommodation for older persons, where it is very important that local people are able to find accommodation close to their families. So that local connection thing is very, very important. In terms of the actual document, I just want to say a couple of things about the rethinking the allocations report, which jarred with me quite a bit. It's fair comment to talk about providing homes to people that need them the most. It's a very simple thing to say, but it's got to be balanced with people in communities knowing that local people from that vicinity are able to access affordable homes. It's the balance with community as well as the individual. And I don't think you are, but it'd be good to get clarity. They note a more considered approach to Section 106 local connection requirements. I think more considered approach, to me, the tone of it is almost like a misuse of the English language, and I don't think we should be going there at all, given the other policy documents which we would then also need to revisit, whether it be NDPs, local plan, housing SPD, the works. I'm almost there, Chair.
I've had a reminder, but I've not applied it yet.
Thank you. And you notice I didn't speak on the first item. So in terms of the hard to let properties, I'd be really interested to see more about the statistics of that at an early stage to try and understand it. And I think it would be good for members to be very much involved in this process, because we've got a very strong take on how this works, because obviously we represent people that come to us very often when they're trying to get housing or trying to understand the system, or indeed get our support to make sure that they can actually get themselves on with the relevant paperwork and get banded and in a position to bid. And I've got one last additional request. Home choice data is used in the planning system, I would say, quite inappropriately a lot of the time, where figures are being bandied around by developers, councillors, all sorts of people who don't really understand the data, what sits behind it. I've sought to get more data out to actually understand it, and a lot of the questions I've asked, as I said, I haven't been able to do that. So I would like to see a bit of a review in how home choice data is used in the planning system done as well, and linked to this review. I'm done, Chair. Thank you.
Councillor Cole, thank you. Could I invite Mel to come back and possibly with John's support answer the questions so far? Councillors Ellenbrook, McLennan and Biscoe, you will be next.
Thank you. So I think one of the questions was around whether all housing associations based in Cornwall are on the Home Choice Register. The answer is no, they're not. Coastline use their own system, although they do still pass nomination properties through Home Choice, and Cornwall Rural Housing Association have recently indicated that they no longer wish to be part of the partnership. Just having it through, I'm not sure there were specific questions. There was a couple of areas of comment. I'm happy to speak with Louise and look at how home choice data is used in the planning system, but I would say that's not my area of expertise, so I would need to take guidance from those who use it in order to be able to look at how it's used and what would be best to provide to support the system. The rethinking allocations I included because it's the most recent study that's been undertaken into allocation processes. I understand the need to balance the community with need. Of course, the legislation does require us to give reasonable preference to particular groups of people in housing need, and it specifies what those are, and that's how our banding is set out. So I completely understand the need to balance that with communities, and I wasn't suggesting that you should pick up all of the rethinking allocation suggestions or recommendations, but I've put them in there because they've done a national study, and I just think it's useful to understand where the sector may be moving with some of the elements of allocation policies. Specialist accommodation is quite an interesting one, and I do agree that we need to think about it really carefully. But what we're talking about is people who may have moved down here who might not meet the local connection criteria currently, but our adult social care system will still need to pick them up potentially and provide them with care packages. And in some cases, the cost of moving them into our specialist accommodation might be cheaper than providing the package in their existing home. So there is a balance there, because we will still end up supporting them regardless of where they're living. But I agree it's something that needs very, very careful consideration. I think that was most points that I've picked up.
Well, I think Councillor Olivier had something about the tone in relation to replacing or suggesting replacement of market-based with need.
Yes, I did. I would like to reiterate that point. Thanks, Jim. Needs and community, needs-based and community orientated, right? If you like.
We used a marketplace because we were thinking of one place where anybody who wants to move, whether that be through ownership, shared ownership, private renting, affordable renting or social renting, could come to one place and find accommodation. So it would be a marketplace in that sense, but I completely understand it's not fixed in stone. There's been very little work undertaken on it to date. It's an area we would like to go to, and we can certainly look at calling it something different It would be needs based, absolutely, because what you're entitled to would be based on your needs and your income. So yes, we can absolutely look at that.
Thank you. I think it's more a question of tone as much as anything else, but I would support Councillor Olivier with that if you could. So, and that takes me on to Councillors Ellenbrook, McLennan and Biscoe in that order, please. Barbara.
Thank you, Jim, and thanks for the presentation. I have to confess I am not the most switched on when it comes to all the home choice stuff, so certainly from my perspective I would love to have some more basic information about how it works and all the other stuff, because I've struggled with this a little bit. But one of the things that does concern me, and Councillor Cole's already mentioned it, and I feel I have to reiterate it, is this reliance on the home choice requirements when it comes to planning. We've just recently in Redruth done a housing needs assessment, and that's completely different from what the home choice register says. So I think one of my questions would be, as an individual, how many times can you say that you're looking for a property? So in other words, are the home choice figures what everybody would like in choice of preference, or are they just one single family person saying I want to live in let's say a 1-bedroom flat? Or would they also say, well, I'd like to live in a 2-bedroom flat, but if you haven't got a 2-bedroom flat, a 1-bed would do? So that kind of makes two registers as I see it, very simplistically. And that's really my main thing. I don't really understand the system, I have to say, so I apologise if that's a naive or silly question.
Barbara, nothing's naive or silly, because if you need clarification, then that's the purpose of this exercise, so no worries at all where that's concerned. Councillor McLennan.
Good morning, Matt, or afternoon, Mel. We've worked obviously together on some of the points and some of your information. I'm totally embarrassed, and I don't know if Councillor Mitchell's still on the line, who I try and work closely with on Cornwall Housing, that you've supplied information today that I, as a non-exec director, have been asking for ages, and Councillor Mitchell said, oh, they're working on putting a new ideas together. Now, the points I see from working it day in, day out, we've all got problems in our own division. We can say officers, and that's respect to the officers on this listen today, don't have to go out and get their feet dirty in the evenings when people are crying their eyes out because they've got nowhere to live. They've had a row, it's exacerbated, and you've got to find a problem. We're not talking about the divisions in detail, but as you know, in my division, there is no communal housing. We have to really rely on housing associations, and they're not building that many, and work closely with them. We just had a lot of 22, and before Live West released them, I asked for an email saying, confirm all 22 have got a relationship to St Stephen's, which happened. I've been to meetings there when they consider the 12 or 13 cases that are really urgent. Mums might be getting beaten up, abused, or sexual problems from partners, and we sit there, and I just was observation from outside parties on there from the NHS, and there was a couple of cases in Penzance. I won't go into details, but Penzance was stuck in my mind that they couldn't do anything about it. So I said at the end of the 3 times I've been, we listened to 13 cases today, but you recommended them to have their grade improved, their banding improved, but what happens next? And nothing happens next. I feel that Cornwall Housing should have been here today. I think we did have Nick Cross, and I missed it because I was poorly with my flu jab symptoms for the Conservatives. But I feel these questions should be asked, besides you, Mel, to the MD and the director in charge of home choice there, because what you're saying makes sense, but I just think it will go on. I feel that we're not getting anywhere with home choice at all.
Thanks, Councillor McLennan.
Okay, I'll finish there. Okay.
Councillor McLennan, thank you. I mean, some of that clearly falls within the remit of safeguarding, so there are alternative ways of, I think, flagging concerns rather than simply upgrading somebody in terms of their eligibility for housing. So that might be a separate conversation. But there are different ways, I think, of sort of bringing matters to other people's attention.
Chair, can I just say I disagree with you slightly?
Okay, that's fine.
Because these people are on home choice, they've been on there for a long time, and they don't move. You know, the situation, they say, might have been on it for 2.5 years. Just quick, I've got one case where the woman was moving to an Ocean Housing property today, and she was told on Friday by Ocean Housing, oh, we're selling that property, you can't move. Okay.
Okay, well, that seems to me something you should be specifically taking up, and I'll happily support you with that if the need arises. Okay. Councillor Biscoe. Mike, thank you.
Oh, well, no, yes, Chairman, thank you. Firstly, I would just like to say that I very, very strongly agree with Dick Cole about his anxieties about local connection, and would add my voice to what he's already said. Speaking for myself in the setting in which I operate as a local member, I find that the outcomes of the home choice process are more of a problem than the process of bidding and all the rest of it, getting into it, because the outcomes don't take into account issues like neighbourhood culture, for instance, and are inclined to throw up anomalies in the sorts of people who are now being asked to live in very close proximity to each other, who, for generational reasons or for cultural reasons or for whatever they are just not compatible with each other and don't actually get any encouragement to try and be compatible with each other or neighbourly. And I think part of this has got to do with the fact that we do tend to focus on individuals rather than families, and families are very complex groups. And I think that the more we go into climate change and all the social change that's coming with that, the more important it's going to be that we think about balance and we think about interactions and relationships. I beg your pardon about the phone. And that our allocations policy is seeking to encourage neighbourhoods and neighbourly relations. That's not to say that you shouldn't introduce challenges and challenging people. It's to say that if you're going to do that, you need to be able to manage it and ensure that things can evolve well. So I'm as much interested in the outcomes of the home choice, what happens as a result of certain allocations being made, as I am about how an individual or family go through the process. And I would like to see some emphasis on that, because I think we're making a rod for our back in many cases. We're consuming huge amounts of officer time dealing with the problems which arise, and actually we're not enhancing people's enjoyment and quality of life as well as we could if we had a system which was able to be a bit more thoughtful about those sorts of things.
Councillor Biscoe, thank you. Mel, would you like to tackle the three sets of sort of comments, questions you've heard?
Yep, absolutely.
So
there was a question from Councillor Ellenbrook about how, I think it was really how we count people on the housing register, and look at housing need, and whether we, count people once or whether we count them twice if they would take a different kind of property. When we provide home choice data, we count a household once. So we take one application, we can then split it down to say that they have a local connection or a preference for a particular area. We can break it down by the different household sizes and their eligibility for different size properties, but we only ever count them once. What I would say is obviously home choice data is only an element of housing needs data. There will be some people who never join home choice register because they don't think they will ever be accommodated through it. There will be other people in the community who are in housing need who for various reasons choose not to join it. So it's not it's one element of housing need that needs to be considered, but it's not the sole element of housing need and what that looks like in Cornwall. Councillor McLennan talked about, I think he was talking about the welfare panel, so banding is increased, but then nothing happens. Home choice, we call it housing register. It's not really a waiting list because it's actively bidding, so you have some degree of choice about when you choose to apply for housing, but clearly it's not a quick turnaround. It's not going to resolve immediate and urgent housing needs, but there are other ways that people can look to move. So if they are in an existing social housing property, they have the right to mutually transfer. So they can look for a partner to do a house swap, if you like. If somebody was facing domestic abuse and needed to move, then we would support them through the homelessness system to do that, because that's an urgent and immediate need, and we need to get them to a place of safety. So it's not the sole way that somebody can find alternative accommodation, and some people will wait for a long period of time, partly because there may not be vacancies in the area that they want, or because of where they are on the housing register in terms of their banding and the date that they applied, or because they're not bidding for everything that would be suitable for them, and they're being selective, which is obviously why there is an element of choice in the system. Cornwall Housing aren't here because this is a council owned policy, so it is for the council to present that to yourselves. They administer it on our behalf, but it is a council policy and they implement it in the way that we ask them to. So, you know, we work very closely with them. They're a key part of the Home Choice Partnership, but in terms of owning the policy, that sits with the council. And I've also picked up the issue around neighbourhoods and anomalies, and yes, that can happen. It's quite difficult to address that through an allocations policy itself, but there is a way of doing it through what's called a local lettings plan. So if you have particular issues in a neighbourhood, you can implement a local lettings plan that allows you to say, I don't know, if you had a block of flats and every flat was occupied by a family with very young children, you might put a local lettings policy in place to try and reduce the number of children because of the impact it was having on the local community. If you have particularly bad antisocial behaviour issues in a community, you might have a local lettings plan that targets people who are in employment, or to say that actually if somebody's got severe mental health or substance misuse issues, we wouldn't put them into that neighbourhood at this time, so that we can try and deal with the issues that are occurring. So there is a way of doing it through a local lettings plan, but not directly through the allocations policy per se.
Okay. Mel, thank you. Councillor Ellen Brooks asked if this is one for the future, if we could perhaps arrange an informal briefing around this, particularly home choice. I would certainly support that, and I suspect it is a question that members are going to be asked about more and more. So there would be some merit in looking at that, I think, in the new year, if Lynn could arrange that with yourselves.
Very happy to.
Brilliant, thank you. Councillor McLennan wants to come back very briefly, but Councillor McLennan, obviously it can't be anything which is personalised in terms of the individuals you may be referring to. So
I'm dealing with all those, Chair. So no. Yeah, just want to say, Mel, that obviously part of the problem is that when young couples or slightly older are looking to get on home choice and get an offer, they really want to be near family because they're looking for babysitters, and that's some of the problems I have about finding somewhere that's local to family so that it all works out well financially and caring.
Okay. Mel isn't responding, Mike, I'm guessing.
Oh, sorry, I can do. I mean, it's a choice-based system, so it's down to that particular household which properties and areas they bid on. So if they want to be close to family, then they will be bidding on properties that become vacant in that locality. Obviously, the smaller the area that you will consider, the sort of the less likely you are to be rehoused quickly. And the wider the area you'll consider, the more likely you are to be rehoused quickly. But it does depend on the vacancies that arise, which we have no control over, and where people choose to bid.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for the follow-up, Mike. Okay, I've now got councillors LeBroy, I've got councillors Buscombe and Taylor following that.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I thought I was slower in the queue. 1.3, the SVPR exemption. Could I just have a little bit more information about what exactly that means and the impact it may have on families that may have already been on the register for some time, please?
Okay, thank you. Councillor Buscombe.
Thank you very much for allowing me to speak, Mr. Chairman, as I'm not a member of this committee. Could I just begin by, sort of praising John Warner and his team at Cornwall Housing, who administer the home choice system and have done a really fantastic job over the last 6 months in particular. I know they're not. I know Cornwall Housing are not here today, but I do think the committee should consider, just praising that team, because I always find them very helpful, and they've had some very difficult challenges during COVID. Just like to start by saying that. A number of the issues that I want to mention have already been raised, and I don't know if John Lloyd Owen is still on the call, but I did leave a number of points on his answer phone yesterday about the percentages and how they could be interpreted in various ways, and I hope that that'll be picked up during the actual review. Just a couple of points. I think the welfare panel has been mentioned. I do think that should become more transparent, and I think it's the case at the moment that the person who's actually being considered, doesn't have the opportunity to attend. And I think perhaps that whole transparency around how the welfare panel works should be looked into. Properties without bids in the east of the county, Mel. I just wondered, do a lot of those 2-bedroom flats have age restrictions on them, and that's why you find it difficult to let them? I just wondered if that's a throwback to the old sheltered housing days, where a lot of flats have an age restriction on them. The IT system's been mentioned. Now, I remember this from the first council that I was a member of, the 2013 council, and I think it's fair to say that the procurement of that IT system was not good. It was very late. I think it was up to 18 months late in its delivery, and I think Councillor Cole used the word clunky. I think he's been very kind, actually. I think it's been not good at all, even for things like when you've got people come to me with complaints or queries about their banding, they can't, if they fill the form in on their mobile phone or on their iPad, they can't keep copies. So all sorts of issues I think need to be looked at there. So if there is going to be a working group, charged with looking at a new IT system or a revised IT system, I think that's a very important piece of work. So I don't think we got it right last time. The local connection. If you went to a Chartered Institute of Housing conference and you mentioned local connection, I mean, that would be poo-pooed. Housing purists, don't like local or parish connections at all, because they consider them to be discriminatory. But I think it's incredibly important that we maintain that in Cornwall to keep our communities alive. So when people say review the parish or local connection, I hope they don't mean watered down, because I think it's so important for us in Cornwall, and I would like to see members involved in any review along with partner organisations. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Councillor Buscombe, thank you very much for those points. Mel will come back to them shortly, I think, but before she does, can I invite Councillor Linda Taylor, please?
Thank you, Chair, for letting me come in. Mel, thank you very much for your report. And I have a number of questions I'd like to pose, please. My first question is, would we put anybody onto the housing register that has no recourse to public funds? My second question is about the Armed Forces Covenant. Where do we, what responsibility do we take with that in relation to armed forces personnel on the housing register? Where tenants have expressed a wish to downside but are actually looking for a local connection, are we actually starting to monitor those expressions of interest to actually help ease up the request for larger housing? And the situation about placements from outside areas, has Cornwall Council or is Cornwall Council engaged with supporting outside placements? And the point that's been made by Councillor Bascombe, Councillor Biscoe and Councillor Cole is the balance of the community, and that local connection is absolutely key, and perhaps as well the support that people get when they are being put into a community. If they need the support, it's absolutely vital that that support is there for them and perhaps for the community that they're going to be making their home in. Thank you.
Councillor Taylor, thank you. Mel, would you like to answer what you can there, please, in relation to the last three speakers? Thank you.
Yep, certainly. So the Syrian Vulnerable Persons Resettlement Scheme is a national scheme. We haven't taken a huge number of households, probably 4 or 5 to date. At the moment, it doesn't have any impact on home choice because other households on home choice, because they have to wait 3 years before they are able to bid for a council home or a home to which we have nomination rights. What this means is that we are accommodating them primarily in temporary accommodation, private sector lease type accommodation, not hotels and bed and breakfast. They do become established in the community, they do contribute to the community, and most of them want to move on and have some security so that they can you know, get settled within that community. But at the moment the options to move them on are very, very limited, so it wouldn't have a significant impact on others on the housing register because they are very, very small in number. And obviously they would still need to bid, etc., and be assessed based on their housing need in the same way as other applicants would. In terms of the welfare panel and it being more transparent, it's not common. I'm not aware of other local authorities who allow applicants to attend any such panel, but certainly we can take that away and look at how we might be able to make it more transparent as part of any review. I don't believe the majority of flats that are hard to let in the east do have age restrictions on them, but I would need to go back and get the list and confirm that for you. In terms of local connection and purists, it's common. You are allowed, it's common for most local authorities to now have some sort of local connection qualification criteria. We were allowed to do that under the Localism Act, and most local authorities have chosen to implement something around local connection. Under the legislation, it's not allowed to overwhelm or override the need to give reasonable preference to particular groups of people. But obviously there are different ways that you can manage that, and there is no suggestion that we wouldn't want to give some consideration to local connection moving forward. In terms of no recourse to public funds, no, somebody shouldn't be on the housing register if they have no recourse to public funds because they are not eligible under the national eligibility criteria that's set out in the legislation. In terms of the Armed Forces Covenant, the government published some guidance to local authorities around allocations in the Armed Forces Covenant. All of that guidance has been incorporated into our home choice and allocations policy. So, for example, we don't penalise somebody for not meeting the local connection criteria on the basis that they've had to move regularly because of armed services placements. Similarly, if somebody has been living in the area and has become settled in the community because they were placed here, we wouldn't penalise them and we would allow them to join the register. So there are various elements set out in the guidance that have all been incorporated. I don't believe that we necessarily log tenants expressing a wish to downsize other than they would all sit in band A. And we would obviously know that they're on there and we'd be able to look collectively at how many people were there for that reason. And in terms of outside area placements, if a local authority places somebody into another local authority area, they are meant to inform that local authority area. I'm not aware that we get a significant number of outside area placements. Supporting them would be, it's a really complicated question. So if somebody was placed by another local authority in our area and we suddenly needed to do some sort of social care assessment, that would have to be undertaken by the local authority area that they're living in. But in terms of housing related support, we would expect the local authority who placed them to support them. I'm not sure that's a comprehensive answer, but like I say, it's quite a complex one. And we have very, very few households, quite often no households who are placed in the area by other local authorities.
Mel, thank you. That was really helpful. Again, I'm guessing you're happy to be contacted outside of the meeting by members who may have a little follow-up to anything they've asked.
Absolutely.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you. Before moving to the vote, I've got three more members, one of whom is Councillor Kirkham, and then I've got Councillors Cole and Olivier wishing to come back, and that will be a very short comeback because we are running slightly late now. So Councillor Kirkham first. Councillor Olivier, contain yourself if you will.
Yep. Thank you very much, Chair. Just to say, a bit like Councillor Allenbrook, I don't fully understand the whole of the system, so excuse me if my points sound a bit rudimentary as well. I was going to ask why the other providers, you say, I think it was one and maybe two now, are leaving Home Choice. I was going to ask why they're leaving and how that impacts on the people who would be looking for their properties. Do we give them any assistance with looking and not only on Home Choice but on whatever other registers they've set up independently? And the other thing was just to say, I've heard from a couple of residents, and I don't know how true this is, that sometimes that properties are released at funny times, so they have to go on the Home Choice register at 12 o'clock at night to register an interest. Now, is this just because they're extremely keen, or are their properties being released overnight?
Councillor Kirkham, thank you. Councillor Cole, is this a brief comeback?
It is. It's just a couple of points I raised question-wise that weren't asked, so I'm just going to clarify those and get a response, hopefully. Okay. Under 1.3, the final bullet point talked about this development roadmap, working with partners to improve performance and delivery. Given that a lot of what we've discussed has been very specific, that section is as vague as can be, and it's about practical amendments that can be done quickly. So I do think we need a bit of clarity as to what that actually means. I also asked the question about we're looking to review the banding for people that are under occupying. Again, I don't understand why we're doing that, because already we've put them into A band, because obviously we want to encourage people to move on. So are we looking to review them back down the banding? Alternatively, are we going to be looking to actually have people to downsize not as band A, but to be down as a band of their own, so that obviously they're not then, because they need a smaller property. It's not they're in massive housing need, but they're being counted as the highest degree of housing need. So is that what we mean by reviewing that, separating the data? And again, following on from other members, I think it would be great if we could have a commitment at the meeting that councillors can be very actively involved in this review through workshops and other things, and not just wait for the next report to come back. Thank you, Jim.
No worries, Councillor Cole. Councillor Olivier, finally, before we go to the vote. Obviously.
Yeah, thank you. I only have a very brief comment. People can pick hole in Home Choice, pick holes in the allocation system. They can pick holes in Home Choice. Councillors can do that, including myself. But the fundamental fact is things aren't working because there isn't enough housing, and we should never lose sight of that. We're never going to make things better simply by administering as well as possible what we've got. We need more houses.
Okay, I think in fairness we can improve things if that's the context, and make things better, but I don't think we'll ever solve it. But the point is taken and accepted, I think. So Mel, some final responses, please, if you will.
Thank you. So I'll come to the first question Councillor Kirkham asked last. In terms of residents having to go on at midnight, no, they don't need to. So we launched the bid round, and you'll have to forgive me because I can't remember what day we open it, and it stays open until it closes. So it opens something like a Thursday and it closes on a Monday, or whatever day it happens to be. So nobody needs to log on at a funny time. All of the properties are released at the same time. and they stay open for a number of days. Bidding, being the first person to bid, will not give you an advantage over somebody who is the last person to bid, because then every shortlist is run based on the banding and the registration date and the local connection criteria that might apply to that property. So please do tell people they don't need to stay up till midnight. In terms of the development roadmap, I think there's a willingness and interest from our home choice partners to work very closely with us to look at how we can develop home choice, how we can make it work better, how we can make it to deliver in a way that meets their needs as well as meets the council's needs. They are very concerned about some elements of it. They're particularly concerned about not getting bids on properties. They are concerned about the IT system and the inability to draw out data that they might want to use, although we are making progress on that with them. They are concerned in some instances about local connection and how that impacts on their ability to let properties be dynamic and move people within their own housing stock when they need to, so through transfers, etc. So there are a number of issues, and I think we just want to sit down with them and make sure that they do play a full part in that partnership and help us to deliver something that works for all of our residents particularly, and make sure that we use their knowledge and understanding of their residents as well as our own knowledge and understanding. Very happy to commit to involving members in any review that's undertaken, whether that be through an informal sounding board or whether it be through workshops. And obviously there's quite a few issues that we've already covered that need to have that open dialogue and debate, so happy to commit to that. The last question I picked up then was, why are other providers leaving home choice and how it impacts on people looking for homes? I don't know the history behind Coastline getting their own system. Unfortunately, that predates my time at the council, so I don't know whether John has the background to that. In terms of how it impacts on people looking for homes, it can make it more complicated. They can't go to one place now to have access to all those homes. However, if they're coming through our prevention and engagement service, we would be supporting and directing them to those sources to look for homes. So we will continue to give people support to look at as many options as are appropriate to their personal circumstances. Thank you.
Mel, thank you.
Jim, yes. the one question about how we were looking to review people under occupying and looking for transfers.
Okay.
Sorry. I think we want to review the banding. So we've put people who are under occupying into band A. So we've given them the highest preference possible, but actually what we're seeing is that they're not bidding. Which would indicate that they're not really looking to move at the current time. And then on the other hand, when we were looking at it last year, we had homeless applicants who can't get an allocation because there are people with higher priority than them. So it's not necessarily reviewing banding for specific issues. I just think we generally need to review that banding and see what's working and what isn't working, and whether we are accommodating people with the right housing need, or whether we're giving overwhelming priority to people who aren't actively using it and looking to move. So I think it just needs a bit of a rebalance, but you know, I think we just need to do some more work around it first to understand it better.
Okay. Mel, thank you. Councillor Pascoe, you'll be the last committee member to speak, and then Councillor Mitchell wants a minute as cabinet member, then we'll go to the vote.
Yeah,
So
yes, mine's very quick, Chair. Thank you very, very much. You just mentioned that people don't have to stay up until midnight. And funnily enough, this morning, I had an email from a young mother of a 1-year-old and 2-year-old who has been trying to get better accommodation for a long time. And she tells me in this email that she bids up until midnight. There are 6 houses in the area, and she's 7th in the queue. So do these people these poor people who are having to bid, do they understand that it doesn't matter what order they're bidding? Because it seems to me they're thinking they've got to stay up all night because they're frightened they'll get to be last in the queue and therefore never ever be in the chance of getting a property. And the other, or accommodation, and the other thing I was going to say, yes, I really would welcome a members briefing or training on this. As a newer councillor, it is a minefield to be able to advise people when they are in situations, and I've had some dreadful ones during this 4 years, and I found it very difficult. Thank you.
Jane, thank you. And I think Mel has already indicated we can look forward to that in the new year, which I think would be really, really helpful. Mel, do you want to pick up on Councillor Pascoe's question in relation to timings and applications?
Yeah, so on the whole, I think it's well understood. Last year with our partners, or it might even have been earlier this year, we made some videos for people to try and explain about the bidding process. They are on the Home Choice web pages. We can think about how we push that message out again. But, you know, the fact is they don't need to stay up until midnight. It's not first come, first served. It is a period of time where anybody can go in and bid, and then it closes and it's shortlisted. All of the letters they receive, etc., when they register for Home Choice should explain this to them. But I think sometimes you get a bit of a myth about how things work, and people hear it and think that that's the case. So it's probably just a requirement for us to keep pushing out the message that that isn't the case.
Thank you, because clearly that was the case here. Thank you.
It might also be helpful, Mel, if as part of the informal we could consider members' thoughts on the best way of getting those messages across, because it's members that tend to pick this up, I think, at least initially. So
very happy to take ideas.
Great, thank you. Councillor Mitchell, Cabinet Member.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you for all the comments from the committee members. I think it's been certainly enlightening for me, and hopefully for the members, just to realise that one policy is never going to sort this out. So if you start from Councillor Olivia's point that you don't have enough housing, we are always going to be having to look at a form of rationing and trying to deal with people who find themselves at a really low ebb and point in their life of possibly being homeless, ranging right out to those who go, oh, it would be really nice if I could just move over there, but it's not that important. I think some of the concerns that have been missed is the fact that Cornwall Housing Limited is quite often dealing with people who are going to be homeless that day. And that's not necessarily a Home Choice issue. We have a load of questions and inputs, and I think interestingly enough, what you need to do with a policy where you are rationing is what a system is there to question the decision that's been made. And I'm not necessarily in the belief that having the people who made the original assessment assess and any request for a review to be done by the same people. So I think that's also one area. We do work extremely closely and extremely well with our housing association partners, but our goals don't always necessarily align. You know, my understanding is that they would certainly prefer to have a lower local connection than 3 years. They would certainly like parish cascading to happen at a much earlier point to help fill their properties up and therefore get rent coming in quicker. When we do have politics involved in this, as we are champions. Thank you, Jim.
Just a reminder, Councillor Mitchell.
We are at a point where we're trying to do the best for our residents, and that might not necessarily be supported by the policies that have been adopted. So for me, I think we do need to review it. I think we also have to acknowledge that it's never ever going to be spot on for everybody who's applying, and we need to take broad strokes to try and do the best and have policies that cover most scenarios. But there will always be the exception to the rule, and I think it's also how we deal with those and the points made by Councillor McLennan in how people in a serious position are dealt with and helped. And I think the view from Richard that the Welfare Committee should be more open and transparent, I think is a good point as to how that can happen. But also Mel's reassurance on the point that, you know, if somebody is in a real situation of need or possible, you know, being a victim, other routes are available. And I think Mel's done extremely well in the preparation of the report and also the answering in questions. But I certainly wish to move forward with a greater view of members of this committee as possible, so that we do set a policy which at first light and first stroke does seem to cover fairly all scenarios. But as I say, there will always be the exception to the rule, and I think we also need to be fair as to how we can do those. But Councillor Cole's point, supported by a number of others, about the imposition of new housing on a community, the sort of payback for them must be that there is the possibility of local families being able to buy, either rent or afford a property at a level that their income supports. Thank you.
Councillor Mitchell, thank you. We have a couple of recommendations to consider, but the first one we've dealt with in terms of we've provided comment and feedback. I think the second one is fairly straightforward. That a further report setting out key recommendations for revision of the housing allocations policy is presented to a future Economic Growth and Development Overview and Scrutiny Committee for comment. I think the only thing I would add to that is that members receive a briefing in relation to home choice and related matters early in the new year. So, Lynn, do we have to vote on that?
Yeah, I was just going to ask you one other thing, whether you also wanted to include, it was, I can't remember which councillor it was, who said about praising the home choice team. Did you want to include that as well?
Yes,
Buscombe it was.
I think that was Councillor Buscombe, and I'm happy to do that if somebody will propose in second. Councillor Cole, are you proposing?
I'm happy to propose, but could I ask the thing you said about the briefing? Could we broaden that out to be a briefing about home choice, but also workshops on the proposed changes, so that we cover everything prior to the new report coming back?
Okay, I'm content with that. I'm hoping that Mel and John are listening and will be okay with that.
Yes, fine.
Thank you. Okay, so we have a couple of additions then. One is to thank officers at Cornwall Housing and within the local authority for their work on this. And the second thing is in relation to a briefing and the reference Councillor Cole made to potentially workshops to work this through.
Do I have a seconder?
Councillor McClenning looks like he's seconding.
Asking a question. I'll second Jim, Councillor Olivier.
Okay.
One more amendment if possible.
Okay, Councillor McClenning, go for it.
I would like to include that we get regular updates, whether it's quarterly, on our areas for information. A summary of what's going on in our area. I think that's important because we just don't know.
I guess we could include that as an additional recommendation, but that obviously is something that officers would need to come back on in terms of resource and availability, but happy to include it. So can we now go to the vote, please, without any further ado? So Councillors Cole proposing and Councillor Olivier seconding.
And I assume Councillor Cole is happy to take that on board.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay, I'll go to the vote. So Councillor Biscoe.
He's for.
Councillor Brown.
For.
Councillor Cole.
For.
Councillor Duffin.
For.
Councillor Ellenbrook.
For.
Councillor Smithers left the meeting, so I'll go to Councillor Robinson.
For.
Councillor LeBroy.
Abstain.
Thank you. Councillor McKenna.
For.
Councillor McLennan.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Olivier.
For.
Councillor Pascoe.
For.
Councillor Pollard.
For.
Councillor Rushworth.
For.
Councillor Thomas.
For.
Thank Thank you. That's been carried 13 votes for, none against and 1 abstention.
Lynn, thank you. We need to get the business of the committee, including the informal presentation, finished by 2. So what I'm going to propose is that we have a break now until 1 o'clock, just a comfort break. We have 20 minutes allocated for questions to cabinet members. Anything that can't be dealt with within that period can be asked outside of the meeting. And then Mr. Rodder can give us the informal briefing, which is after the full meeting finishes, in relation to fish quota and potential opportunities. So I'll now suspend the meeting until 1 o'clock, invite members to do what they need to do. If you could be back by 1 o'clock, that would be really much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I just ask all councillors to put their microphones on mute? Thank you.
Anybody there? Councillor
I'm here.
I'm not here.
I'm here.
Hi, Jane.
Hi.
Yeah, I'm back. Chair.
Excellent. So I suspect we probably have a quorum, do we? I missed
I haven't had a sandwich yet.
Neither, Mike. I'm aiming to finish by, well, this meeting, the formal meeting will finish in about 20 minutes. And then we'll have an informal briefing on fish quota. And that will finish by 2.
And then?
And then you can have your sandwich. Lynn, are you there?
Yes, I'm here, Chairman.
Okay, we're now slightly beyond the appointed time. Do we have a quorum? I'm guessing you're counting.
Everybody's logged in, so I'm guessing they're back in the meeting.
Okay, in which case, fine. David Rodden just came back and said he should do the informal at 1:20 so we'll crack on with questions to Cabinet members for the next almost 20 minutes. Anything that can't be dealt with in that 20 minutes can be dealt with outside of the meeting. So, are we good to go? Are we being filmed?
Yes, Chairman, it was not turned off, so it ran continuously.
Okay, so welcome back to anybody who may have temporarily switched off. We now have a short period of questioning from members of the committee to Cabinet members. The meeting will conclude around about 1:20 to facilitate an informal briefing for members, which will conclude by 2 o'clock. So thank you. So did you want to speak, Lynn? You've got your hand up, Lynn.
No, sorry, that was my mistake.
Thank you. I've got Councillors Olivier and Rushworth. You'll both be aware, members, that we have a short space of time for this, so if you could keep it succinct and accept that what can't be answered in the meeting will be done outside. Thank you. Councillor Olivier?
Yes, I do accept that, Chair. I have 2 questions. One, I think the first is directed to Andrew Mitchell. I'm not sure about the first. Put in very simple terms, in the way it's put to me, and following on from a question I asked John Lloyd Owen earlier, how much financial support do we receive from the government in order to provide social and affordable housing in Cornwall? How much direct help do we get from the government? That's triggered by the fact that if you look at Andrew's report, he's talking about the help we're getting for move on accommodation. So I'd like an answer to that question, and if Andrew can't give an instant figure, I don't mind, but I would like to get that information because it's something that's asked of me a lot. How much direct financial help do we get from the government to provide social and affordable housing of varying kinds? The other question is the question of business grants and holiday let premises has reappeared. Holiday let business premises that are rateable, will have a rateable value of 15,000 or less, are eligible for £1,334 to compensate them for their losses in November of this year during the lockdown. Is it possible to ask those holiday let business premises owners for evidence that they are actually being used in that way, or have we no choice but to simply dish the money out on application? That's probably not for Andrew, but he's welcome to have a go if he likes. Thank you.
I think that might be something which Councillor Dwelly might pick up if he's here, either inside or outside of the meeting. Councillor Rushworth, please. And Councillor Brown, I didn't see you there, but I'll bring you in after Councillor Rushworth.
Thank you, Jim. I'd just like a question to Councillor Dwelly, but before that, I'd just like to say to Councillor Olivier that Robert Jenrick has just issued a new social housing charter, which has only just been published, and it's all being announced today in Parliament. So a lot of his questions may be answered there. Secondly, to Councillor Dwelly, he's done a very comprehensive report, which back to us all, which appear to show all the hard work he's doing, and especially on those pet projects. But I want to comment on something that's missing. It's just been announced that applications have now been invited for Freeports, And I'm really pleased that the LEP are taking up this challenge and employing consultants to put a report together to see what the benefits could be. I'm very disappointed that we as members have not been asked to have a briefing on it and to see, so that members can see what are the benefits and what are the negatives of it. And I admit that there will be both. But this is a great opportunity for Cornwall to provide the high-class jobs that everybody's trying to work to. And I'm very disappointed that it doesn't seem that Councillor Dwelly is putting any support towards the LEP movements on this. You know, we are the benefactors of what would happen at the airport. The airport has struggled to get tenants in there for many, many years. This would be a big push. And I know he must know what's going on because he's also a director of the LEP. So I'd love to know what his comments as to why we're not giving support to the LEP. Thank you.
Councillor Rushworth, thank you. Councillor Malcolm Brown.
Yes. Could I just say as background to my question, could I congratulate Councillor Dwelly and the officers in the planning department who put together the response to the planning documents from the government. But could I ask Councillor Dwelly if he will confirm that our opposition to the changes that the government is trying to impose are not lessened as a result of the rumours coming out of the Conservative Party nationally that that the algorithm is going to be altered. If anything, that, you know, it may be the algorithm is altered in a way that will prove more satisfactory from the point of view of the number of houses imposed on Cornwall, but in fact it actually demonstrates how political and unobjective the whole process is, and reinforces the case that Cornwall Council has been making for a long time, that more planning powers and more control over our own destiny ought to be devolved to Cornwall Council. And even if the government tackled that, it will do nothing about the other many major problems with the government's latest proposals about the reduction in the quota for affordable housing. So really, I just want an assurance for Councillor Dwelly that he's still up for the fight as much as ever.
Councillor Brown, thank you. Councillor Rushworth, just in relation to your comments, I did make inquiries into Glen Caplan in relation to Freeports, and I was assured that there was a piece of work being undertaken, which I'm sure will find its way back to the council. So I support, as a minimum, your suggestion that the potential benefits be evaluated. So I just wanted to sort of place that on record. Can I invite Cabinet members briefly, please, and by all means follow up with a written response to pick up any points raised. Councillor Mitchell, do you want to start, as the first one I think was housing? Yeah, I can see you.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Cornelius, for the question. I don't actually know what is in our base budget line for housing from the government. I don't think it's very much. The recent announcements of funding, and they are welcomely fairly regularly at the moment, but I think it just goes to reflect the sheer fear, I think, that both central and local government have over the concerns in relation to housing and what could possibly happen over this winter. But I'll have to defer to John Lloyd Owen if he knows the answer.
Yeah, carry on, John.
Sorry. Probably best if I follow up by email with a comprehensive and properly researched response. But we do receive, as well as the money set out in the briefing note, we do receive each year homelessness grants, which help us support the housing options and homelessness services that we provide, and obviously receive funding to support our development programme as the registered provider partners from Homes England, which is again funded by the government. But I'll capture all that in an email reply to members of the committee, and perhaps we can add it to the notes that go out from the meeting.
John, thank you.
Thank you for that.
Thank you, Cornelius. Councillor Dwelly, you were next, I think, in relation to both the Freeports question, which I would hope for a very brief response on, but also Councillor Brown's comments in relation to the proposed planning changes.
And the business grants.
Sorry, and the business grants in relation to let homes. I'm sort of hoping Councillor Dwelly is still with us.
I'm here.
Excellent. Have you been listening?
Sorry, I know you can't necessarily see everyone on the screen. I have been here, Jim.
Okay.
Yeah, Cornelius, I think it's really important we don't muddle up second homes and holiday lets, and I fear you're doing that. What we are not going to do as Cornwall Council is we're not going to use our discretionary fund to pay anything to second homeowners who are on the business rates register with the money we control. We are also, and I've mentioned this to MPs in meetings, and we will be further communicating with government, we think that the system that has been set up is too lax, and it allows people who don't really do holiday letting businesses to claim grants, but we don't control that. If we have an issue, it's with government on this, and we will be saying that robustly to government. But we need to keep in mind there's two separate grants coming up at the moment. The one that's on business rates is totally out of our hands, whatever we think, and we are, of course, as councillors, doing more than just saying to government, naughty government. We actually have to look at getting things done and getting money out to businesses. So that's going to be a clear message to government that we totally agree that the system is wrong, that we think that there shouldn't be loopholes. However, there are businesses who in Cornwall owned businesses, the genuine holiday let businesses, and it would be a tragedy if they were attacked at the same time as the people who are getting around the loopholes, in my opinion. But on to the next one, Freeport. Stephen, yeah, thanks for that. Yes, I am on the LEP, and yes, it has been discussed, but not in any great detail. There's some research being done on it. I'm personally not minded to support it on Cornwall Council land. That's my position. I think it's a distraction. However, I certainly wouldn't oppose another body, for example, possibly in Falmouth, where we don't own the land. This can still be something that could be looked at. I think we've got enough on our plate at the airport to protect the airport and not get distracted by this. So that's my position. Basically, what I'm saying is my position is the same as my predecessors. However, not going to be against hearing information, and certainly interested to see what might happen with bodies such as the Falmouth the Port. Malcolm Brown, thank you for that. I'm absolutely ready for the fight with government on this ridiculous set of planning proposals. The algorithm may or may not change, but there shouldn't be an algorithm. We set our own numbers. The government has expected us to deliver what we've said we will in our local plan, and we are slightly exceeding that, and that's how it should be, that we do what we are meant to do with our plan. We should be setting the local plan. And to give an example and a flavour of the fight left, the thing I'm most outraged about in this new proposal is that affordable homes will not be required on sites of up to 50 rather than 10 units. And my intention is, if that is the government's fixed position, that we will, as an authority, use legal advice and QC's opinion, and will basically refuse to implement that on the basis that we believe our local plan, which says 10 homes, has precedent. Thank you.
Councillor Dwelly, thank you. I'm sure you'll be talking to Councillor Mitchell about coordinating that particular issue. And also you'll recall that I have requested in my capacity as chair of committee that in relation to sort of COVID related grants for businesses, that no money be paid over at all to second home owners, and that the government be lobbied to see whether we can get some sort of exemption for Cornwall, bearing in mind the significant numbers here.
Jim, we're not going to be paying money ourselves to second homeowners. Second homeowners aren't on business rates.
Well, okay, a certain amount of money went out first time to people who I think would be classed as second homeowners, but either way.
I think they're not, actually. I think one of the things we need to distinguish is what is a holiday let and second home. But your principle of your loophole aversion is one I share, and that message is definitely going to go out very clearly and has already done so to MPs.
Excellent. I was thinking as much of Councillor Olivier as anybody else, but thank you.
Well, I could say, Jim, if no second homeowners have received a grant, then there isn't a loophole, is there? There's a loophole or there isn't. Right. So, but sorry to cut in. I shouldn't have done that.
Holiday lets.
To make members of the committee
Keep
aware.
up with the definitions.
Okay. I simply wanted to make members of the committee aware that I had made representations on this issue. Councillor Broy and Councillor Kirkham.
Thank you, Chair. This is for Jeff Brown, by the way. May I please observe that I think it's an error to apply parking charge increases in a sensitive post-COVID recovery economy without reference to members first. I worry that car parks are still being treated as they always appear to have been, as a cash cow. And I'd ask Jeff to reaffirm the Council's commitment to the work of the positive parking inquiry and the ongoing panel, please.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Roy. Councillor Kirkham.
I'm sorry, I've had to nip out and come back again, so I may have missed an answer to this. I was just going to raise the airport. I was going to ask, I know that representations were being made to government, and somebody may have covered this before, but I wondered if there had been any information coming back about that yet.
Okay. And finally, Councillor Pascoe, Councillor Jane Pascoe.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Very quickly, my question is to Councillor Jeff Brown. The MP for South East Cornwall asked the question in the chamber yesterday about the tolls on our two crossings on the Tamar Bridge, and the answer came back that 60 million had been allocated to Cornwall and 30 million to Plymouth, and that they could apply that for compensation if we fit the criteria. And the second question I wanted to ask him, repeatedly, I know people have been writing about the parking when the lockdown is opened up on the 2nd of December and the Christmas trading. And he hasn't replied to letters I know from the Liscard Town Forum, but when you walk around a very small struggling town and the tears are in the eyes of these businesses because they've lost most of their Christmas trading, actually some of it to supermarkets who are selling everything they could have been selling. We need to help them, and we need to say that Cornwall Council is caring and supportive of small businesses, because at the moment they really don't think we care. So I just wondered if he will rethink that and give extended time for Christmas parking. Thank you.
Councillor Pascoe, thank you. I was a bit concerned, Councillor Brown, that you might not get any questions, but you have a full set there. So do you want to deal with them in order, please?
More than happy to, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you.
In terms of parking generally, we are not going to increase parking this year. We're going to implement the charges that were already approved for 2020-21, which were consulted on last year. Because we didn't implement them in April as planned, we actually froze the charges at the 2019 level. So there won't be an additional increase this year. We'll just be implementing the charges we should have implemented in April. So that's the situation with that. In terms of the airport, and can I just correct something on my report? The report says that we've used 11.2 million of the spaceport funding to support the airport. It's actually half of the 11.2. We've used the 5.6, and because of the measures we've taken to shut the terminal in November, we're not anticipating that the second lockdown will add to our losses. So we think we can cover off the situation we're in at the moment with the airport. I sat in on a meeting with the airport operators and the Secretary of State the other day, where he was very, very clear that regional airports are vital to regional economies, but unfortunately there wasn't any additional money available to keep the airport going. We think we're okay at the moment, but we'll continue to press government, and the MP, Steve Double, which is it's in this area, has actually been working hard on our behalf as well. Tolls on the bridge, that 60 million isn't specifically for tolls. We have been told that the loss on the bridge is part of the submission that the council have put in terms of lost revenue, and we could get 70% back. We won't know that until the 27th of November. So we're waiting to see the result of that. There is a further complication with the suggestion to increase the to reduce the discount on the tariff and also increase the tolls next year, because Plymouth City Council haven't got it into their programme for a meeting until January. So the recommendation to full council will have to be amended slightly, but we're working on that. The most important recommendation from my perspective is recommendation 4, which says that if money comes through from the government, or we find another way forward for funding the bridge, then we can actually suspend any planned increases on the tolls anyway. So we're waiting to see what happens on the 27th of November. And with regard to the letters to Liskeard Town Forum, I'm sorry to correct you, Councillor Pascoe, but I have responded direct to Councillor Ambler. I've been very clear. It's the same response that I've sent out to all members and all town and parish councillors, explaining the situation with free parking at Christmas. We are offering a free parking day. We are continuing to offer free parking for key workers that fit the government scheme. There is a limit to how much we can do, but we are also open to any town and parish council asking if we can make a free car park or all car parks in their area free on particular days, if town and parish councils are prepared to pick up the costs, which we can actually make available to them. So that offer's been made. Just to put you in the picture, we have lost probably £7 million of income from parking this year. That helps to maintain the car parks. It also goes into road maintenance as well. So there is a limit to what we can do, and we're doing everything we can at the moment.
Councillor Brown, thank you. And can I thank Covenant members for their written reports as well, which are appreciated in advance of the meeting. Councillor Pascoe, you were shaking your head there. I can offer you a very, very brief comeback if it's.
Well, if I may, Chair, and I have an email, a copy email from the forum actually saying maybe it's a subsequent letter. Maybe you sent the original, but I think from the subsequent letter he has had no reply. But what is use is one day to these businesses. They're losing their livelihoods. We are just not helping them at all. And yes, you possibly have lost 7 million revenue, but you wouldn't have had it anyway because people were in lockdown. So I really think we should bite the bullet here and find a way of supporting not just my town, but all the small towns. They are absolutely beside themselves, and they're struggling anyway. They were before lockdown, and it's even worse now. So please reconsider it. That's all we're asking, even if it's just one car park for shoppers in each town, if they have several. We cannot bury our heads in the sand and not help these people. They are begging us to help them.
Councillor Pascoe, thank you. Councillor Mike Thomas, final contribution here.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. This is to Councillor Dwelly. Thank you for your letter yesterday about revitalising the High Street. Could you say a little bit more about access to the toolkit? Does toolkit access come when you email in, or is it available online? Because I can't find it anywhere.
Councillor Dwelly, are you there?
Councillor McKenna, I had a conversation with Councillor Dwelly this morning about it, if this helps.
Yes,
and
certainly.
My understanding is that despite the fact that the letter says it's there on the website, it's not actually quite there yet. They're waiting for the web people to approve it, so it should be going onto the website fairly soon.
But apologies, I'm really sorry, I just nipped to the loo. Yeah, absolutely, all coming any moment. Okay, Mike.
Okay. Could I just add a quick supplementary, Mr. Chair?
Are you staying for the fish quota presentation, Councillor Thomas?
Of course, I wouldn't miss it.
In which case, you may have a quick supplementary.
Thank you. I'm just interested in the the composition of the group that's going to be created, the mixture of people, public, volunteers and council. Can you clarify what a volunteer is? Is a volunteer a town councillor? Because there seems to be, I'm a bit unsure what's happening here, because obviously you have council officials, town clerks and responsible officers, but volunteers, are those the town councillors or not? And
No.
my second question within that is the data protection. Once those groups are formed, are they going to be protected by Cornwall Council? Because they can't be committees of town councils, because they wouldn't be able to vote if they were.
Briefly, we don't want to over specify. We're giving a broad steer that a third, and when we say a third voluntary, we don't mean councils. Your third that's public would be, say, a Cornwall councillor, someone from the town council, maybe an MP, maybe something like that. Private sector is fairly obvious. Yep, the rest might be community groups of some kind, charities. So it's that third sector, I suppose. But we're not here to say you've got to do it exactly like that. We're just saying that's how town deals are done, and the closer you get to that, the better, within reason. In terms of data protection and everything else, I think the reality is that for the time being, if you're not given a fund to run, but you're doing things for yourselves in terms of having a town team, a bit like we did in Penzance, Jim, you know, no, we're not having Cornwall Council do data protection on it, but it would be probably sensible to involve the town council where possible.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Jolly, thank you. Councillor Thomas, thank you. At this point, I'll close the formal part of the meeting and thank Cabinet members and other members and officers for their participation, which has been much welcomed. We will now, once the filming ceases, we will morph into a half-an-hour session in relation to an update on fish quota by way of an informal briefing. And I will encourage as many members as they can to stay, and we will be finishing around about 2 o'clock. But thank you to everybody who's participated and watched. Thank you.
Chairman, the live stream is now switched off.
Excellent, seamless.